Chapter 1 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 1. Sir John Fothergill. Who that has ever seen them can forget the ruins of Blossholme Abbey, set upon their mount between the great waters of the tidal estuary to the north, the rich lands and grazing marshes that, backed with woods, border it east and south, and to the west by the rolling uplands, merging at last into purple moor, and far away the sombre eternal hills. Probably the scene has not changed very much since the days of Henry VIII, when those things happened of which we have to tell. For here no large town has arisen, nor have mines been dug, or factories built to affront the earth and defile the air with their hideousness and smoke. The village of Blossholme we know has scarcely varied in its population, for the old records tell us this, and as there is no railway here, its aspect must be much the same. Houses built of the local grey stone do not readily fall down. The folk of that generation walked in and out of the doorways of many of them, although the roofs for the most part are now covered with tiles or rough slates in place of reeds from the dike. The parish wells also, fitted with iron pumps that have superseded the old rollers and buckets, still serve the place with drinking water as they have done since the days of the first Edward, and perhaps for centuries before. Although their use, if not their necessity, has passed away, not far from the abbey gate, the stocks and whipping post, the latter arranged with 3 sets of iron loops, fixed at different heights and of varying diameters to accommodate the wrists of man, woman, and child, may still be found in the middle of the priest's green. These stand, it will be remembered, under a quaint old roof supported on rough oaken pillars, and surmounted by a weathercock, which the monkish fancy has fashioned to the shape of the archangel blowing the last trump. His clarion or coach-horn, or whatever instrument of music it was he blew, has vanished. The parish book records that in the time of George I, a boy broke it off, melted it down, and was publicly flogged in consequence, the last time, apparently, that the whipping post was used. But Gabriel still twists about as manfully as he did when old Peter, the famous smith, fashioned and set him up with his own hand in the last year of King Henry VIII, as it is said to commemorate the fact that on this spot stood the stakes to which Cicely Harfleet, Lady of Blossholme, and her foster mother, Emlyn, were chained to be burned as witches. So it is with everything at Blossholme, a place that time has touched but lightly. The fields, or many of them, bear the same names and remain identical in their shape and outline. The old farmsteads and the few halls in which reside the gentry of the district stand where they always stood. The glorious tower of the abbey still points upwards to the sky, although bells and roofs are gone, while half a mile away the parish church that was there before it, having been rebuilt indeed upon Saxon foundations in the days of William Rufus, yet lies among its ancient elms. Farther on, situate upon the slope of a vale down which runs a brook through meadows, is the stark ruin of the old nunnery that was subservient to the proud abbey on the hill, some of it now roofed in with galvanized iron sheets, and used as cowsheds. It is of this abbey and this nunnery, and of those who dwelt around them in a day bygone, and especially of that fair and persecuted woman who came to be known as the Lady of Blossholme, that our story has to tell. It was dead winter in the year 1535, the 31st of December indeed. Old Sir John Fothergill, a white-bearded, red-faced man of about 60 years of age, was seated before the log fire in the dining hall of his great house at Shefton, spelling through a letter which had just been brought to him from Blossholme Abbey. He mastered it at length, and when it was done, anyone who had been there to look might have seen a knight and gentleman of large estate in a rage remarkable even for the time of the 8th Henry. He dashed the document to the ground. He drank 3 cups of strong ale, of which he had already had enough, in quick succession. He swore a number of the best oaths of the period, and finally, in the most expressive language, he consigned the body of the Abbot of Blossholme to the gallows, and his soul to hell. "He claims my lands, does he?" he exclaimed, shaking his fist in the direction of Blossholme. "What does the rogue say? That the abbot who went before him parted with them to my grandfather for no good consideration, but under fear and threats? Now, writes he, This Secretary Cromwell, whom they call Vicar General, has declared that the said transfer was without the law, and that I must hand over the said lands to the Abbey of Blossholme on or before Candlemas. What was Cromwell paid to sign that order with no inquiry made, I wonder? Sir John poured out and drank a fourth cup of ale, then set to walking up and down the hall. Presently he halted in front of the fire, and addressed it as though it were his enemy. You are a clever fellow, Clement Malden. They tell me that all Spaniards are, and you were taught your craft at Rome, and sent here for a purpose. You began as nothing, and now you are Abbot of Blossholme, and, if the king had not faced the Pope, would be more. But you forget yourself at times, for the southern blood is hot, and when the wine is in, the truth is out. There were certain words you spoke not a year ago before me, and other witnesses of which I will remind you presently. Perhaps when Secretary Cromwell learns them, he will cancel his gift of my lands, and mayhap lift that plotting head of yours up higher. I'll go remind you of them. Sir John strode to the door and shouted. It would not be too much to say that he bellowed like a bull. It opened after a while, and a serving man appeared, a bow-legged, sturdy-looking fellow with a shock of black hair. Why are you not quicker, Geoffrey Stokes? He asked. Must I wait your pleasure from noon to night? I came as fast as I could, master. Why, then, do you rate me? Would you argue with me, fellow? Do it again, and I will have you tied to a post and lashed. Lash yourself, master, and let out the collar and good ale, which you need to do, replied Geoffrey in his gruff voice. There be some men who never know when they are well served, and such are apt to come to ill and lonely ends. What is your pleasure? I'll do it if I can, and if not, do it yourself. Sir John lifted his hand as though to strike him, then let it fall again. I like one who braves me to my teeth, he said more gently. And that was ever your nature? Take it not ill, man, I was angered, and have cause to be. The anger I see, but not the cause, though, as a monk came from the abbey but now, perhaps I can hazard a guess. Aye, that's it, Geoffrey. Hark, I ride to yonder crow's nest, and at once. Saddle me a horse. Good, master, I'll saddle 2 horses. 2? I said 1. Fool, can I ride a pair at once, like a mountebank? I know not, but you can ride one and I another. When the Abbot of Blossholme visits Sir John Fotherell of Shefton, he comes with hawk on wrist, with chaplains and pages, and 10 stout men-at-arms, of whom he keeps more of late than a priest would seem to need about him. When Sir John Fotherell visits the Abbot of Blossholme, at least he should have 1 serving-man at his back, to hold his nag, and bear him witness. Sir John looked at him shrewdly. I called you fool, he said, but you are none except in looks. Do as you will, Geoffrey, but be swift. Stop. Where is my daughter? The Lady Cicely sits in her parlour. I saw her sweet face at the window but now, staring out at the snow, as though she thought to see a ghost in it. Grunted Sir John. The ghost she thinks to see rides a grand grey mare, stands over 6 feet high, has a jolly face, and a pair of arms well made for sword and shield, or to clip a girl in. Yet that ghost must be laid, Geoffrey. Pity if so, master. Moreover, you may find it hard. Ghost laying is a priest's job, and when maids' waists are willing, men's arms reach far. Be off, sirrah! Roared Sir John, and Geoffrey went. 10 minutes later, they were riding for the abbey, 3 miles away, and within half an hour Sir John was knocking, not gently, at its gate, while the monks within ran to and fro like startled ants, for the times were rough, and they were not sure who threatened them. When they knew their visitor at last, they set to work to unbar the great doors and let down the drawbridge that had been hoisted up at sunset. Presently Sir John stood in the abbot's chamber, warming himself at the great fire, and behind him stood his serving-man, Geoffrey, carrying his long cloak. It was a fine room, with a noble roof of carved chestnut wood and stone walls hung with costly tapestry, whereon were worked scenes from the Scriptures. The floor was hid with rich carpets made of coloured Eastern wools. The furniture also was rich and foreign-looking, being inlaid with ivory and silver, while on the table stood a golden crucifix, a miracle of art, and upon an easel, so that the light from a hanging silver lamp fell on it, a life-sized picture of the Magdalene by some great Italian painter, turning her beauteous eyes to heaven and beating her fair breast. Sir John looked about him and sniffed. Now, Geoffrey, would you think that you were in a monk's cell or in some great dame's bower? Hunt under the table, man. Sure, you will find her lute and needlework. Whose portrait is that, think you? And he pointed to the Magdalene. A sinner turning saint, I think, master. Good company for laymen when she was sinner, and good for priests now that she is saint. For the rest, I could snore well here after a cup of yon red wine." And he jerked his thumb toward a long-necked bottle on a sideboard. "Also, the fire burns bright, which is not to be wondered at, seeing that it is made of dry oak from your Cicely wood." "How do you know that, Geoffrey?" asked Sir John. "By the grain of it, master, by the grain of it. I have hewn too many a timber there not to know. There's that in the Cicely clays which makes the rings grow wavy and darker at the heart. See there." Sir John looked, and swore an angry oath. "You are right, man, and now I come to think of it, when I was a little lad my old grandsire bade me note this very thing about the Cicely oaks. These cursed monks waste my woods beneath my nose. My forester is a rogue. They have scared or bribed him, and he shall hang for it." "First prove the crime, master, which won't be easy. Then talk of hanging, which only kings and abbots, with right of gallows, can do at will. Ah, you speak truth," he added in a changed voice. "It is a lovely chamber, though not good enough for the holy man who dwells in it, since such a saint should have a silver shrine like him before the altar yonder, as doubtless he will do when ere long he is old bones." And, as though by chance, he trod upon his lord's foot, which was somewhat gouty. Round came Sir John like the Blossholme weathercock on a gusty day. "Clumsy toad!" he yelled, then paused, for there within the arras, that had been lifted silently, stood a tall, tonsured figure clothed in rich furs, and behind him 2 other figures, also tonsured, in simple black robes. It was the abbot with his chaplains. "Benedicite," said the abbot in his soft, foreign voice, lifting the 2 fingers of his right hand in blessing. "Good day," answered Sir John, while his retainer bowed his head and crossed himself. "Why do you steal upon a man like a thief in the night, holy father?" he added irritably. "That is how we are told judgment shall come, my son," answered the abbot, smiling. "And in truth there seems some need of it. We heard loud quarreling, and talk of hanging men. What is your argument?" "A hard one of oak," answered old Sir John sullenly. "My servant here said those logs upon your fire came from my Cicely wood, and I answered him that if so they were stolen, and my reeve should hang for it. The worthy man is right, my son, and yet your forester deserves no punishment. I bought our scanty store of firing from him, and, to tell truth, the count has not yet been paid. The money that should have discharged it has gone to London, so I asked him to let it stand until the summer rents come in. Blame him not, Sir John, if, out of friendship, knowing it was not to you, he has not bared the nakedness of our poor house." "Is it the nakedness of your poor house," and he glanced round the sumptuous chamber, "that caused you to send me this letter saying that you have Cromwell's writ to seize my lands?" asked Sir John, rushing at his grievance like a bull, and casting down the document upon the table. "Or do you also mean to make payment for them when your summer rents come in?" "Nay, son, in that matter duty led me. For 20 years we have disputed of those estates, which, as you know, your grandsire took from us in a time of trouble, thus cutting the abbey lands in twain, against the protest of him who was abbot in those days. Therefore, at last I laid the matter before the vicar general, who, I hear, has been pleased to decide the suit in favor of this abbey." "To decide a suit of which the defendant had no notice!" exclaimed Sir John. "My lord abbot, this is not justice. It is roguery that I will never bear. Did he decide aught else, pray you?" "Since you ask it, something, my son. To save costs, I laid before him the sundry points at issue between us. In sum, this is the judgment. Your title to all your Blossholme lands, and those contiguous, totaling 8,000 acres, is not voided, yet it is held to be tainted and doubtful." "God's blood, why?" asked Sir John. "My son, I will tell you," replied the abbot gently. "Because within 100 years they belonged to this abbey by gift from the crown, and there is no record that the crown consented to their alienation." "No record!" exclaimed Sir John, "when I have the indentured deed in my strong box, signed by my great-grandfather and the abbot Frank Ingham! No record, when my said forefather gave you other lands in place of them which you now hold. But go on, holy priest." "My son, I obey you. Your title, though pronounced so doubtful, is not utterly voided. Yet it is held that you have all these lands as tenant of this abbey, to which, should you die without issue, they will relapse, or should you die with issue under age, such issue will be ward to the abbot of Blossholme for the time being, and, failing him, that is, if there were no abbot and no abbey, of the crown." Sir John listened, then sank back into a chair, while his red face went white as ashes. "Show me that judgment," he said slowly. "It is not yet engrossed, my son. Within 10 days, or so I hope, but you seem faint. The warmth of this room after the cold outer air, perhaps. Drink a cup of our poor wine." And at a motion of his hand, one of the chaplains stepped to the sideboard, filled a goblet from the long-necked flask that stood there, and brought it to Sir John. He took it as one that knows not what he does, then suddenly threw the silver cup and its contents into the fire, whence the chaplain recovered it with the wood tongs. "It seems that you priests are my heirs," said Sir John in a new quiet voice, "or so you say, and if that is so, my life is likely to be short. I'll not drink your wine, lest it should be poisoned. Hearken now, Sir Abbot. I believe little of this tale, though doubtless by bribes and other means you have done your best to harm me behind my back up yonder in London. Well, tomorrow at the dawn, come fair weather or come foul, I ride through the snows to London, where I too have friends, and we will see, we will see. You are a clever man, Abbot Maldon, and I know that you need money, or its worth, to pay your men-at-arms and satisfy the great costs at which you live. And there are our famous jewels. Yes, the old Crusader jewels. Therefore you have sought to rob me, whom you ever hated, and perchance Cromwell has listened to your tale. Perchance, fool priest," he added slowly, "he had it in his mind to fat this church goose of yours with my meal before he wrings its neck and cooks it." At these words the abbot started for the first time, and even the two impassive chaplains glanced at each other. "Ah, does that touch you?" asked Sir John Fothergill. "Well, then, here is what shall make you smart. You think yourself in favor at the court, do you not? Because you took the oath of succession, which braver men, like the brethren of the Charterhouse, refused, and died for it. But you forget the words you said to me when the wine you love had a hold of you in my hall." "Silence! For your own sake, silence, Sir John Fothergill," broke in the abbot. "You go too far." "Not so far as you shall go, my lord abbot, ere I have done with you. Not so far as Tower Hill or Tyburn, thither to be hung and quartered as a traitor to his grace. I tell you, you forget the words you spoke, but I will remind you of them. Did you not say to me when the guests had gone that King Henry was a heretic, a tyrant, and an infidel whom the Pope would do well to excommunicate and depose? Did you not, when I led you on, ask me if I could not bring about a rising of the common people in these parts, among whom I have great power, and of those gentry who know and love me, to overthrow him, and in his place set up a certain cardinal pole, and for the deed promise me the pardon and absolution of the Pope, and much advancement in his name and that of the Spanish Emperor?" "Never," answered the abbot. "And did I not," went on Sir John, taking no note of his denial, "did I not refuse to listen to you, and tell you that your words were traitorous, and that had they been spoken otherwhere than in my house, I, as in duty bound by my office, would make report of them? Ay, and have you not from that hour striven to undo me whom you fear?" "I deny it all," said the abbot again. "These be but empty lies bred of your malice, Sir John Fothergill." "Empty words, are they, my lord abbot? Well, I tell you that they are all written down and signed in due form. I tell you I had witnesses you knew naught of who heard them with their ears. Here stands one of them behind my chair. Is it not so, Geoffrey?" "Ay, master," answered the serving man. "I chanced to be in the little chamber beyond the wainscot with others waiting to escort the abbot home, and heard them all, and afterward, and they put our marks upon the writing. As I am a Christian man, that is so, though, master, this is not the place that I should have chosen to speak of it, however much I might be wronged." "It will serve my turn," said the enraged knight, "though it is true that I will speak of it louder elsewhere, namely, before the king's council. Tomorrow, my lord abbot, this paper and I go to London, and then you shall learn how well it pays you to try to pluck a Fothergill of his own." Now it was the abbot's turn to be frightened. His smooth, olive-colored cheeks sank in and went white, as though already he felt the cord about his throat. His jeweled hand shook, and he caught the arm of one of his chaplains and hung to it. "Man," he hissed, "do you think that you can utter such false threats and go hence to ruin me, a consecrated abbot? I have dungeons here. I have power. It will be said that you attacked me, and that I did but strive to defend myself. Others can bring witness besides you, Sir John." And he whispered some words in Latin or Spanish into the ear of one of the chaplains, whereon that priest turned to leave the room. "Now it seems that we are getting to business," said Geoffrey Stokes, as, laying his hand upon the knife at his girdle, he slipped between the monk and the door. "That's it, Geoffrey," cried Sir John. "Stop the rat's hole. Look you, Spaniard, I have a sword. show me to your gate, or by virtue of the king's commission that I hold, I do instant justice on you as a traitor, and afterward answer for it if I win out." The abbot considered a moment, taking the measure of the fierce old knight before him. Then he said slowly, "Go as you came, in peace, O man of wrath and evil. But know that the curse of the church shall follow you. I say that you stand near to ill." Sir John looked at him. The anger went out of his face, and instead, upon it appeared something strange, a breath of foresight, an inspiration, call it what you will. "By heaven and all its saints, I think you are right, Clement Meldon," he muttered. "Beneath that black dress of yours, you are a man like the rest of us, are you not? You have a heart, you have members, you have a brain to think with. You are a fiddle for God to play on, and however much your superstitions mask and alter it, out of those strings now and again will come some squeak of truth. Well, I am another fiddle, of a more honest sort, mayhap, though I do not lift 2 fingers on my right hand and say, 'Benedicite, my son,' and 'Your sins are forgiven you.' And just now the God of both of us plays his tune in me, and I will tell you what it is. I stand near to death, but you stand not far from the gallows. I'll die an honest man, you will die like a dog, false to everything, and afterwards let your beads and your masses and your saints help you if they can. We'll talk it over when we meet again elsewhere. And now, my lord abbot, lead me to your gate, remembering that I follow with my sword. Geoffrey, set those carrion crows in front of you, and watch them well. My lord abbot, I am your servant. March." End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 2. The Murder by the Mere. For a while Sir John and his retainer rode in silence. Then he laughed loudly. "Geoffrey," he called, "that was a near touch. Sir Priest was minded to stick his Spanish pick-tooth between our ribs and shrive us afterwards, as we lay dying, to salve his conscience." "Yes, master, only, being reasonable, he remembered that English swords have a longer reach, and that his bullies are in the Ford ale-house, seeing the old year out, and so put it off. Master, I have always told you that old October of yours is too strong to drink at noon. It should be saved till bedtime." "What do you mean, man?" "I mean that ale spoke yonder, not wisdom. You have showed your hand and played the fool." "Who are you to teach me?" asked Sir John angrily. "I meant that he should hear the truth for once, the slimy traitor." Perhaps, but these be bad days for truth, and those who court her. Was it needful to tell him that tomorrow you journey to London upon a certain errand?" "Why not? I'll be there before him." "Will you ever be there, master? The road runs past the abbey, and that priest has good ruffians in his pay who can hold their tongues." "Do you mean that he will waylay me?" "I say he dare not. Still, to please you, we will take the longer path through the forest." "A rough one, master, but who goes with you on this business? Most of us are away with the wains, and others make holiday. There are but 3 serving men at the hall, and you cannot leave the Lady Cicely without a guard, or take her with you through this cold. Remember there's wealth yonder, which some may need, more even than your lands," he added meaningfully. "Wait a while, then, till your people return, or you can call up your tenants, and go to London as one of your quality should, with 20 good men at your back." "And so give our friendly abbot time to get Cromwell's ear, and through him that of the king? No, no. I ride tomorrow at the dawn with you, or, if you are afraid, without you, as I have done before, and taken no harm." "None shall say that Geoffrey Stokes is afraid of man, or priest, or devil," answered the old soldier, colouring. "Your road has been good enough for me this 30 years, and it is good enough now. If I warned you, it was not for my own sake, who care little what comes, but for yours, and that of your house." "I know it," said Sir John, more kindly. "Take not my words ill. My temper is up to-day. Thank the saints, here is the hall at last. Why, whose horse has passed the gates before us?" Geoffrey glanced at the tracks, which the moonlight showed very clearly in the new-fallen snow. "Sir Christopher Harfleet's grey mare," he said. "I know the shoeing, and the round shape of the hoof. Doubtless he is visiting Mistress Cicely." "Whom I have forbidden to him," grumbled Sir John, swinging himself from the saddle. "Forbid him not," answered Geoffrey, as he took his horse. "Christopher Harfleet may yet be a good friend to a maid in need, and I think that need is nigh." "Mind your business, knave," shouted Sir John. "Am I to be set at naught in my own house by a chit of a girl and a gallant who would mend his broken fortunes?" "If you ask me, I think so," replied the imperturbable Geoffrey, as he led away the horses. Sir John strode into the house by the back way, which opened on to the stable-yard. Taking the lantern that stood by the door, he went along galleries and upstairs to the sitting-chamber above the hall, which, since her mother's death, his daughter had used as her own, for here he guessed that he would find her. Setting down the lantern upon the passage-table, he pushed open the door, which was not latched, and entered. The room was large, and, being lighted only by the great fire that burned upon the hearth, and 2 candles, all this end of it was hid in shadow. Near to the deep window-place the shadow ceased, however, and here, seated in a high-backed oak chair, with the light of the blazing fire falling full upon her, was Cicely Fothergill, Sir John's only surviving child. She was a tall and graceful maiden, blue-eyed, brown-haired, fair-skinned, with a round and childlike face which most people thought beautiful to look upon. Just now this face, that generally was so arch and cheerful, seemed somewhat troubled. For this there might be a reason, since, seated upon a stool at her side, was a young man talking to her earnestly. He was a stalwart young man, very broad about the shoulders, clean-cut in feature, with a long, straight nose, black hair, and merry black eyes. Also, as such a gallant should do, he appeared to be making love with much vigor and directness, for his face was upturned pleading with the girl, who leaned back in her chair answering him nothing. At this moment, indeed, his copious flow of words came to an end, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps for other reasons, and was succeeded by a more effective method of attack. Suddenly sinking from the stool to his knees, he took the unresisting hand of Cicely and kissed it several times, then, emboldened by his success, threw his long arms about her, and before Sir John, choked with indignation, could find words to stop him, drew her towards him and treated her red lips as he had treated her fingers. This rude proceeding seemed to break the spell that bound her, for she pushed back the chair, and, escaping from his grasp, rose, saying in a broken voice, "Oh, Christopher, dear Christopher, this is most wrong." "May be," he answered. "So long as you love me, I care not what it is." "That you have known these 2 years, Christopher. I love you well, but alas, my father will have none of you. Get you hence now, ere he returns, or we both shall pay for it, and I, perhaps, be sent to a nunnery where no man may come." "Nay, sweet, I am here to ask his consent to my suit." Then at last Sir John broke out. "To ask my consent to your suit, you dishonest knave!" he roared from the darkness, whereat Cicely sank back into her chair, looking as though she would faint, and the strong Christopher staggered like a man pierced by an arrow. "First to take my girl and hug her before my very eyes, and then, when the mischief is done, to ask consent to your suit!" And he rushed at them like a charging bull. Cicely rose to fly, then, seeing no escape, took refuge in her lover's arms. Her infuriated father seized the first part of her that came to his hand, which chanced to be one of her long brown plaits of hair, and tugged at it till she cried out with pain, purposing to tear her away, at which sight and sound Christopher lost his temper also. "Leave go of the maid, sir," he said in a low, fierce voice, "or by God I'll make you." "Leave go of the maid!" gasped Sir John. "Why, who holds her tightest, you or I? Do you leave go of her?" "Yes, yes, Christopher," she whispered, "ere I am pulled in two." Then he obeyed, lifting her into the chair, but her father still kept his hold of the brown tress. "Now, Sir Christopher," he said, "I am minded to put my sword through you, and pierce your daughter's heart as well as mine. Well, do it if you will, and when we are dead, and you childless, weep yourself to the grave." "Oh, father, father!" broke in Cicely, who knew the old man's temper, and feared the worst. "In justice and in pity, listen to me. All my heart is Christopher's, and has been from a child. With him I shall have happiness, without him black despair, and that is his case too, or so he swears. Why then should you part us? Is he not a proper man, and of good lineage, and name unstained? Until of late did you not ever favor him much, and let us be together day by day? And now, when it is too late, you deny him. Oh, why, why?" "You know why well enough, girl, because I have chosen another husband for you. The Lord Despard is taken with your baby face, and would marry you, but this morning I had it under his own hand." "The Lord Despard!" gasped Cicely. "Why, he only buried his second wife last month. Father, he is as old as you are, and drunken, and has grandchildren of well nigh my age. I would obey you in all things, but never will I go to him alive." "And never shall he live to take you," muttered Christopher. "What matter his years, daughter? He is a sound man, and has no son, and should one be born to him, his will be the greatest heritage within 3 shires. Moreover, I need his friendship, who have bitter enemies. But enough of this. Get you gone, Christopher, before worse befall you." "So be it, sir, I will go. But first, as an honest man and my father's friend, and, as I thought, my own, answer me one question. Why have you changed your tune to me of late? Am I not the same Christopher Harfleet I was a year or 2 ago? And have I done aught to lower me in the world's eye or in yours?" "No, lad," answered the old knight bluntly. "But since you will have it, here it is. Within that year or 2 your uncle, whose heir you were, has married and bred a son, and now you are but a gentleman of good name, and little to float it on. That big house of yours must go to the hammer, Christopher. You'll never stow a bride in it." "Ah, I thought as much. Christopher Harfleet with the promise of the Lesborough lands was one man. Christopher Harfleet without them is another, in your eyes. Yet, sir, I hold you foolish. I love your daughter, and she loves me, and those lands and more may come back, or I, who am no fool, will win others. Soon there will be plenty of going up there at court, where I am known. Further, I tell you this. I believe that I shall marry Cicely, and earlier than you think, and I would have had your blessing with her." "What! Will you steal the girl away?" asked Sir John furiously. "By no means, sir, but this is a strange world of ours, in which from hour to hour top becomes bottom, and bottom top, and there I think I shall marry her. At least I am sure that Despard the sot never will, for I'll kill him first, if I hang for it. Sir, surely you will not throw your pearl upon that muck-heap. Better crush it beneath your heel at once. Look, and say you cannot do it." And he pointed to the pathetic figure of Cicely, who stood by them with clasped hands, panting breast, and a face of agony. The old knight glanced at her out of the corners of his eyes, and saw something that moved him to pity, for at bottom his heart was honest, and though he treated her so roughly, as was the fashion of the times, he loved his daughter more than all the world. "Who are you that would teach me my duty to my bone and blood?" he grumbled. Then he thought a while, and added, "Hear me now, Christopher Harfleet. Tomorrow at the dawn I ride to London with Geoffrey Stokes on a somewhat risky business." "What business, sir?" "If you would know, that of a quarrel with yonder Spanish rogue of an abbot, who claims the best part of my lands, and has poisoned the ear of that upstart, the Vicar-General Cromwell. I go to take the deeds, and prove him a liar, and a traitor also, which Cromwell does not know. Now, is my nest safe from you while I am away? Give me your word, and I'll believe you, for at least you are an honest gentleman, and if you have poached a kiss or 2, that may be forgiven. Others have done the same before you were born. Give me your word, or I must drag this girl through the snows to London at my heels." "You have it, sir," answered Christopher. "If she needs my company, she must come for it to Cranwell Towers, for I'll not seek hers while you are away." "Good. Then one gift for another. I'll not answer my Lord of Despard's letter till I get back again, not to please you, but because I hate writing. It is a labor to me, and I have no time to spare tonight. Now, have a cup of drink and be off with you. Love-making is thirsty work." "Aye, gladly, sir, but hear me. Ride not to London with such slight attendance after a quarrel with Abbot Maldon. Let me wait on you. Although my fortunes be so low, I can bring a man or 2, 6 or 8 indeed, while yours are away with the wains." "Never, Christopher. My own hand has guarded my head these 60 years, and can do so still. Also," he added, with a flash of insight, "as you say, the journey is dangerous, and who knows? If aught went wrong, you might be wanted nearer home. Christopher, you shall never have my girl. She is not for you. Yet, perhaps, if need were, you would strike a blow for her, even if it made you excommunicate. Get hence, wench. Why do you stand there gaping on us, like an owl in the sunlight? And remember, if I catch you at more such tricks, you'll spend your days mumbling prayers in a nunnery, and much good may they do you." "At least I should find peace there, in gentle words," answered Cicely, with spirit, for she knew her father, and the worst of her fear had departed. "Only, sir, I did not know that you wished to swell the wealth of the abbots of Blossholme." "Swell their wealth!" roared her father. "Nay, I'll stretch their necks. Get you to your chamber, and send up Geoffrey with the liquor." Then, having no choice, Cicely curtsied, first to her father, and next to Christopher, to whom she sent a message with her eyes that she dared not utter with her lips, and so vanished into the shadows, where presently she was heard stumbling against some article of furniture. "Show the maid a light, Christopher," said Sir John, who, lost in his own thoughts, was now gazing into the fire. Seizing one of the 2 candles, Christopher sprang after her like a hound after a hare, and presently the pair of them passed through the door and down the long passage beyond. At a turn in it they halted, and once more, without word spoken, she found her way into those long arms. "You will not forget me, even if we must part," sobbed Cicely. "Nay, sweet," he answered. "Moreover, keep a brave heart. We do not part for long, for God has given us to each other. Your father does not mean all he says, and his temper, which has been stirred today, will soften. If not, we must look to ourselves. I keep a swift horse or 2, Cicely. Can you ride one, if need were?" "I have ever loved riding," she said meaningfully. "Good. Then you shall never go to that fat hog sty, for I'll stick him first. And I have friends both in Scotland and in France. Which like you best?" "They say the air of France is softer. Now away from me, or one will come to seek us." And they tore themselves apart. "Emmeline, your foster mother, is to be trusted," he said rapidly. "Also, she loves me well. If there be need, let me hear of you through her." "Aye," she answered, "without fail," and glided from him like a ghost. "Have you been waiting to see the moon rise?" asked Sir John, glancing at Christopher from beneath his shaggy eyebrows as he returned. "Nay, sir, but the passages in this old house of yours are most wondrous long, and I took a wrong turn in threading them." "Oh," said Sir John, "well, you have a talent for wrong turns, and such partings are hard. Now, do you understand that this is the last of them?" "I understand that you say so, sir." "And that I mean it too, I hope. Listen, Christopher," he added, with earnestness, but in a kindly voice. "Believe me, I like you well, and would not give you pain, or the maid yonder, if I could help it. Yet I have no choice. I am threatened on all sides by priest and king, and you have lost your heritage. She is the only jewel that I can pawn, and for her own safety's sake and her children's sake must marry well. Yonder Despard will not live long. He drinks too hard. And then your day may come, if you still care for his leavings, perhaps in 2 years, perhaps in less, for she will soon see him out. Now let us talk no more of the matter, but if aught befalls me, be a friend to her. Here comes the liquor. Drink it up, and be off. Though I seem rough with you, my hope is that you may quaff many another cup at Shefton." It was 7 o'clock of the next morning, and Sir John, having eaten his breakfast, was girding on his sword, for Geoffrey had already gone to fetch the horses, when the door opened and his daughter entered the great hall, candle in hand, wrapped in a fur cloak, over which her long hair fell. Glancing at her, Sir John noted that her eyes were wide and frightened. "What is it now, girl?" he asked. "You'll take your death of cold among these draughts." "Oh, father," she said, kissing him, "I came to bid you farewell, and to pray you not to start." "Not to start? And why?" "Because, father, I have dreamed a bad dream. At first, last night I could not sleep, and when at length I did, I dreamed that dream thrice." And she paused. "Go on, Cicely. I am not afraid of dreams, which are but foolishness, coming from the stomach." "Mayhap, yet, father, it was so plain and clear I can scarcely bear to tell it to you. I stood in a dark place amidst black things that I knew to be trees. Then the red dawn broke upon the snow, and I saw a little pool with brown rushes frozen in its ice. And there, at the edge of the pool, by a pollard willow with one white limb, you lay, your bare sword in your hand and an arrow in your neck, shot from behind, while in the trunk of the willow were other arrows, and lying near you 2 slain. Then cloaked men came as though to carry them away, and I awoke. I say I dreamed it thrice." "A jolly good morrow indeed," said Sir John, turning a shade paler. "And now, daughter, what do you make of this business?" "I? Oh, I make that you should stop at home, and send someone else to do your business. Sir Christopher, for instance." "Why, then I should balk your dream, which is either true or false. If true, I have no choice. It must be fulfilled. If false, why should I heed it? Cicely, I am a plain man, and take no note of such fancies. Yet I have enemies, and it may well chance that my day is done. If so, use your mother's wit, girl. Beware of Malden. Look to yourself, and as for your mother's jewels, hide them." And he turned to go. She clasped him by the arm. "In that sad case, what should I do, father?" she asked eagerly. He stopped and stared at her up and down. "I see that you believe in your dream," he said, "and therefore, although it shall not stay a fodderel, I begin to believe in it too. In that case, you have a lover, whom I have forbid to you. Yet he is a man after my own heart, who would deal well by you. If I die, my game is played. Set your own anew, sweet Cicely, and set it soon, ere that abbot is at your heels. Rough as I may have been, remember me with kindness, and God's blessing and mine be on you. Hark, Geoffrey calls, and if they stand, the horses will take hold. There, fare you well. Fear not for me. I wear a chain shirt beneath my cloak. Get back to bed and warm you. And he kissed her on the brow, thrust her from him, and was gone. Thus did Cicely and her father part, forever. All that day Sir John and Geoffrey, his serving-man, trotted forward through the snow. That is, when they were not obliged to walk because of the depth of the drifts. Their plan was to reach a certain farm in a glade of the woodland within 2 hours of sundown, and sleep there, for they had taken the forest path, leaving again for the fens and Cambridge at the dawn. This, however, proved not possible because of the exceeding badness of the road. So it came about that when the darkness closed in on them a little before 5 o'clock, bringing with it a cold, moaning wind and a scurry of snow, they were obliged to shelter in a faggot-built woodman's hut, waiting for the moon to appear among the clouds. Here they fed the horses with corn that they had brought with them, and themselves also from their store of dried meat and barley cakes, which Geoffrey carried on his shoulder in a bag. It was a poor meal eaten thus in the darkness, but served to stay their stomachs and pass away the time. At length a ray of light pierced the doorway of the hut. "She's up," said Sir John. "Let us be going ere the nags grow stiff." Making no answer, Geoffrey slipped the bits back into the horses' mouths and led them out. Now the full moon had appeared like a great white eye between two black banks of cloud, and turned the world to silver. It was a dreary scene on which he shone, a dazzling plain of snow, broken by patches of hawthorns, and here and there by the gaunt shape of a pollard oak, since this being the outskirt of the forest, folk came hither to lop the tops of the trees for firing. 150 yards away or so, at the crest of a slope, was a round-shaped hill, made, not by nature, but by man. None knew what that hill might be, but tradition said that once, hundreds or thousands of years before, a big battle had been fought around it in which a king was killed, and that his victorious army had raised this mound above his bones to be a memorial forever. The story was indeed that, being a sea-king, they had built a boat or dragged it thither from the river shore and set him in it with all the slain for rowers. Also that he might be seen at nights, seated on his horse in armor, and staring about him, as when he directed the battle. At least it is true that the mount was called Kingsgrave, and that people feared to pass it after sundown. As Geoffrey Stokes was holding his master's stirrup for him to mount, he uttered an exclamation and pointed. Following the line of his outstretched hand, in the clear moonlight Sir John saw a man, who sat, still as any statue, upon a horse on the very point of Kingsgrave. He appeared to be covered with a long cloak, but above it his helmet glittered like silver. Next moment a fringe of black cloud hid the face of the moon, and when it passed away, the man and horse were gone. "What did that fellow there?" asked Sir John. "Fellow?" answered Geoffrey, in a shaken voice. "I saw none. That was the ghost of the grave. My grandfather met him ere he came to his end in the forest. None knew how, for the wolves, of which there were plenty in his day, picked his bones clean, and so have many others for hundreds of years, always just before their doom. He is an ill fowl, that ghost of the grave, and those who clap eyes on him do wisely to turn their horses' heads homeward, as I would to-night if I had my way, master." "What use, Geoffrey? If the sight of him means death, death will come. Moreover, I believe nothing of the tale. Your ghost was some forest reeve or herdsman." "A forest reeve or herdsman who wanders about in a steel helm on a fine horse in snow time when there are no trees to cut or cattle to mind. Well, have it as you will, master, only God save me from such reeves and herdsmen, for I think they hail from hell." "Then he was a spy watching whither we go," answered Sir John angrily. "If so, who sent him? The abbot of Blossholme? In that case I would sooner meet the devil, for this means mischief. I say that we had better ride back to Shefton." "Then do so, Geoffrey, if you are scared, and I will go on alone, who, being on an honest business, fear not Satan, or an abbot either." "Nay, master, many a year ago, when we were younger, I stood by you on Flodden Field, when Sir Edward, Christopher Harfleet's father, was killed at our side, and those red-bearded Scotch bear-breeks pressed us hard, yet I never itched to turn my back, even after that great fellow with an axe got you down, and we thought that all was lost. Then shall I do so now? Though it is true that I fear yon goblin more than all the Highlanders beyond the Tweed. Ride on. Man can die but once, and for my part I care not when it comes, who have little to lose in an ill world." So without more words they started forward, peering about them as they went. Soon the forest thickened, and the track they followed wound its way round great trunks of primeval oaks, or the edges of bog-holes, or through brakes of thorns. Hard enough it was to find it at times, since the snow made it one with the bordering ground, and the gloom of the oaks was great. But Geoffrey was a woodman born, and from his childhood had known the shape of every tree in that waste, so that they held safely to their road. Well would it have been for them if they had not! They came to a place where 3 other tracks crossed that which they rode upon, and here Geoffrey Stokes, who was ahead, held up his hand. "What is it?" asked Sir John. "It is the marks of 10 or a dozen shod horses, passed within 2 hours since the last snow fell. And who be they, I wonder?" "Doubtless travellers like ourselves. Ride on, man. That farm is not a mile ahead." Then Geoffrey broke out. "Master, I like it not," he said. "Battle horses have gone by here, not chapmen's or farmers' nags, and I think I know their breed. I say that we had best turn about, if we would not walk into some snare." "Turn you, then," grumbled Sir John indifferently. "I am cold and weary, and seek my rest." "Pray God that you may not find it when you are colder," muttered Geoffrey, spurring his horse. They went on through the dead winter silence, that was broken only by the hoots of a flitting owl hungry for the food that it could not find, and the swish of the feet of a galloping fox as it looped past them through the snow. Presently they came to an open place ringed in by forest, so wet that only marsh trees would grow there. To their right lay a little ice-covered mere, with sere, brown reeds standing here and there upon its face, and at the end of it a group of stark, pollarded willows, whereof the tops had been cut for poles by those who dwelt in the forest farm near by. Sir John looked at the place and shivered a little, perhaps because the frost bit him. Or was it that he remembered his daughter's dream, which told of such a spot? At any rate, he set his teeth, and his right hand sought the hilt of his sword. His weary horse sniffed the air and neighed, and the neigh was answered from close at hand. "Thank the saints, we are nearer to the farm than I thought," said Sir John. As he spoke the words, a number of men appeared galloping down on them from out of the shelter of a thorn-brake, and the moonlight shone on the bared weapons in their hands. "Thieves!" shouted Sir John. "At them now, Geoffrey, and win through to the farm!" The man hesitated, for he saw that their foes were many, and no common robbers, but his master drew his sword and spurred his beast, so he must do likewise. In 20 seconds they were among them, and some one commanded them to yield. Sir John rushed at the fellow, and, rising in his stirrups, cut him down. He fell all of a heap, and lay still in the snow, which grew crimson about him. One came at Geoffrey, who turned his horse so that the blow missed, then took his weight upon the point of his sword, so that this man, too, fell down and lay in the snow, moving feebly. The rest, thinking this greeting too warm for them, swung round and vanished again among the thorns. "Now ride for it," said Geoffrey. "I cannot," answered Sir John. "One of those knaves has hurt my mare." And he pointed to blood that ran from a great gash in the beast's foreleg, which it held up piteously. "Take mine," said Geoffrey. "I'll dodge them afoot." "Never, man, to the willows, we will hold our own there." And springing from the wounded beast, which tried to hobble after them, but could not, for its sinews were cut, he ran to the shelter of the trees, followed by Geoffrey on his horse. "Who are these rogues?" he asked. "The abbot's men-at-arms," answered Geoffrey. "I saw the face of him I spitted." Now Sir John's jaw dropped. "Then we are sped, friend, for they dare not let us go. Cicely dreams well." As he spoke, an arrow whistled by them. "Geoffrey," he went on, "I have papers on me that should not be lost, for with them might go my girl's heritage. Take them." And he thrust a packet into his hand. "And this purse also, there's plenty in it. Away, anywhere, and lie hid out of reach awhile, or they'll still your tongue. Then I charge you on your soul, come back with help, and hang that knave abbot. For your lady's sake, Geoffrey, she'll reward you, and so will God above." The man thrust away purse and deeds in some deep pocket. "How can I leave you to be butchered?" he muttered, grinding his teeth. As the words left his lips, he heard his master utter a gurgling sound, and saw that an arrow, shot from behind, had pierced him through the throat. Saw, too, he who was skilled in war, that the wound was mortal. Then he hesitated no longer. "Christ rest you," he said. "I'll do your bidding or die." And turning his horse, he drove the rowels into its side, causing it to bound away like a deer. For a moment the stricken Sir John watched him go. Then he ran out of his cover, shaking his sword above his head, ran into the open moonlight to draw the arrows. They came fast enough. But ere ever he fell, for that steel shirt of his was strong, Geoffrey, lying low on his horse's neck, was safe away, and though the murderers followed hard, they never caught him. Nor, though they searched for days, could they find him at Shefton or elsewhere, for Geoffrey, who knew that all roads were blocked, and who dared not venture home, doubling like a hare across country, had won down to the water, where a ship lay foreign bound, and by dawn was on the sea. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 3. A Wedding. About noon of the day after that upon which Sir John had come to his death, Cicely Fothergill sat at her meal in Shefton Hall. Not much of the rough midwinter fare passed her lips, for she was ill at ease. The man she loved had been dismissed from her because his fortunes were on the wane, and her father had gone upon a journey which she felt, rather than knew, to be very dangerous. The great old hall was lonesome, also, for a young girl who had no comrades near. Sitting there in the big room, she bethought her how different it had been in her childhood, before some foul sickness, of which she knew not the name or nature, had swept away her mother, her 2 brothers, and her sister, all in a single week, leaving her untouched. Then there were merry voices about the house, where now was silence, and she alone, with naught but a spaniel dog for company. Also, most of the men were away with the wains, laden with the year's clip of wool, which her father had held until the price had heightened, nor in this snow would they be back for another week, or perhaps longer. Oh, her heart was heavy as the winter clouds without, and young and fair as she might be, almost she wished that she had gone when her brothers went, and found her peace. To cheer her spirits, she drank from a cup of spiced ale that the manservant had placed beside her covered with a napkin, and was glad of its warmth and comfort. Just then the door opened, and her foster-mother, Mrs. Stower, entered. She was still a handsome woman in her prime, for her husband had been carried off by a fever when she was but 19, and her baby with him, whereon she had been brought to the hall to nurse Cicely, whose mother was very ill after her birth. Moreover, she was tall and dark, with black and flashing eyes, for her father had been a Spaniard of gentle birth, and, it was said, gypsy blood ran in her mother's veins. There were but 2 people in the world for whom Emmeline Stower cared, Cicely, her foster-child, and a certain playmate of hers, one Thomas Bull, now a lay-brother at the Abbey, who had charge of the cattle. The tale was that in their early youth he had courted her, not against her will, and that when, after her parents' tragic deaths, as a ward of a former abbot of Blossholme, she was married to her husband, not with her will, this Thomas had put on the robe of a monk of the lowest degree, being but a yeoman of good stock, though of little learning. Something in the woman's manner attracted Cicely's attention, and gave a hint of tragedy. She paused at the door, fumbling with its latch, which was not her way, then turned and stood upright against it, like a picture in its frame. "What is it, nurse?" asked Cicely, in a shaken voice. "From your look you bear tidings." Emmeline Stower walked forward, rested one hand upon the oak table, and answered, "Ay, evil tidings if they be true. Prepare your heart, my sweet." "Quick with them, Emmeline," gasped Cicely. "Who is dead? Christopher?" She shook her head, and Cicely sighed in relief, adding, "Who then? Oh, was that dream true?" "Ay, dear, you are an orphan." The girl's head fell forward. Then she lifted it, and asked, "Who told you? Give me all the truth, or I shall die." "A friend of mine, who has to do with the Abbey yonder. Ask not his name." "I know it, Emmeline. Thomas Bull," she whispered back. "A friend of mine," repeated the tall, dark woman, "told me that Sir John Fothergill, your sire, was murdered last night in the forest by a gang of armed men, of whom he slew 2. "From the Abbey?" queried Cicely in the same whisper. "Who knows? I think it. They say that the arrow in his throat was such as they make there. Geoffrey Stokes was hunted, but escaped on to some ship that had her anchor up." "I'll have his life for it, the coward!" exclaimed Cicely. "Blame him not yet. He met another friend of mine, and sent a message. It was that he did but obey his master's last orders, and, as he had seen too much, and to linger here was certain death, if he lived, he would return from overseas, with the papers, when the times are safer. He prayed that you would not doubt him." "The papers? What papers, Emmeline?" She shrugged her broad shoulders. How should I know? Doubtless some that your father was taking to London, and did not desire to lose. His iron chest stands open in his chamber. Now poor Cicely remembered that her father had spoken of certain deeds which he must take with him, and began to sob. "Weep not, darling," said her foster-mother, smoothing Cicely's brown hair with her strong hand. "These things are decreed of God, and done with. Now you must look to yourself. Your father is gone, but one remains." Cicely lifted her tear-stained face. "Yes, I have you," she said. "Me," she answered, with a quick smile. "Nay, of what use am I? Your nursing days are over. What did you tell me your father said to you before he rode, about Sir Christopher? Hush, there's no time to talk. You must away to Cranwell Towers." "Why?" asked Cicely. "He cannot bring my father back to life, and it would be thought strange indeed that at such a time I should visit a man in his own house. Send and tell him the tidings. I bide here to bury my father, and," she added proudly, "to avenge him." "If so, sweet, you bide here to be buried yourself in yonder nunnery. Hark, I have not told you all my news. The Abbot Maldon claims the Blossholme lands under some trick of law. It was as to them that your father quarrelled with him the other night, and with the land goes your wardship, as once mine went under this monk's charter. Before sunset the abbot rides here with his men-at-arms to take them, and to set you for safe-keeping in the nunnery, where you will find a husband called Holy Church." "Name of God, is it so?" said Cicely, springing up. "And the most of the men are away. I cannot hold the hall against that foreign abbot and his hirelings, and an orphaned heiress is but a chattel to be sold. Oh, now I understand what my father meant. Order horses. I'll off to Christopher. Yet stay, nurse. What will he do with me? It may seem shameless, and will vex him." "I think he will marry you. I think tonight you will be a wife. If not, I'll know the reason why," she added viciously. "A wife? Tonight?" exclaimed the girl, turning crimson to her hair. "And my father but just dead. How can it be?" "We'll talk of that with Harfleet. Mayhap, like you, he'll wish to wait and ask the banns, or to lay the case before a London lawyer. Meanwhile I have ordered horses and sent a message to the abbot to say you come to learn the meaning of these rumours, which will keep him still till nightfall, and another to Cranwell Towers, that we may find food and lodging there. Quick now, and get your cloak and hood. I have the jewels in their case, for Maldon seeks them more even than your lands, and with them all the money I can find. Also I have bid the sewing girl make a pack of some garments. Come now, come, for that abbot is hungry, and will be stirring. There is no time for talk." 3 hours later, in the red glow of the sunset, Christopher Harfleet, watching at his door, saw 2 women riding towards him across the snow, and knew them while they were yet far off. "It is true, then," he said to Father Roger Necton, the old clergyman of Cranwell, whom he had summoned from the vicarage. "I thought that fool of a messenger must be drunk. What can have chanced, father?" "Death, I think, my son. For sure naught else would bring the Lady Cicely here unaccompanied save by a waiting woman. The question is, what will happen now?" And he glanced sideways at him. "I know well if I can get my way," answered Christopher, with a merry laugh. "Say now, father, if it should so be that this lady were willing, could you marry us?" "Without a doubt, my son, with the consent of the parents." And again he looked at him. "And if there were no parents?" "Then with the consent of the guardian, the bride being under age." "And if no guardian had been declared or admitted?" "Then such a marriage duly solemnized, being a sacrament of the Church, would hold fast until the crack of doom, unless the Pope annulled it, and, as you know, the Pope is out of favour in this realm on this very matter of marriage. Let me explain the law to you, ecclesiastic and civil." But Christopher was already running towards the gate, so the old parson's lecture remained undelivered. The 2 met in the snow, Emlyn Stower riding on ahead, and leaving them together. "What is it, sweetest?" he asked. "What is it?" "Oh, Christopher," she answered, weeping, "my poor father is dead, murdered, or so Emlyn says." "Murdered? By whom?" "By the abbot of Blossholme's soldiers, so says Emlyn, yonder in the forest last eve, and the abbot is coming to Shefton to declare me his ward, and thrust me into the nunnery. That was Emlyn's tale. And so, although it is a strange thing to do, having none to protect me, I have fled to you, because Emlyn said I ought." "She is a wise woman, Emlyn," broke in Christopher. "I always thought well of her judgment. But did you only come to me because Emlyn told you?" "Not altogether, Christopher. I came because I am distraught, and you are a better friend than none at all, and where else should I go? Also, my poor father, with his last words to me, although he was so angry with you, bade me seek your help if there were need, and oh, Christopher, I came because you swore you loved me, and therefore it seemed right. If I had gone to the nunnery, although the prioress, Mother Matilda, is good, and my friend, who knows, she might not have let me out again, for the abbot is her master, and not my friend. It is our lands he loves, and the famous jewels. Emmeline has them with her. By now they were across the moat, and at the steps of the house. So, without answering, Christopher lifted her tenderly from the saddle, pressing her to his breast as he did so, for that seemed his best answer. A groom came to lead away the horses, touching his bonnet and staring at them curiously, and, leaning on her lover's shoulder, Cicely passed through the arched doorway of Cranwell Towers into the hall, where a great fire burned. Before this fire, warming his thin hands, stood Father Necton, engaged in eager conversation with Emmeline Stower. As the pair advanced, this talk ceased, evidently because it was of them. "Mistress Cicely," said the kindly-faced old man, speaking in a nervous fashion, "I fear that you visit us in a sad case." And he paused, not knowing what to add. "Yes, indeed," she answered, "if all I hear is true. They say that my father is killed by cruel men, I know not for certain why or by whom, and that the abbot of Blossholme comes to claim me as his ward, and immure me in Blossholme Priory, whither I would not go. I have fled here to escape him, having no other refuge, though you may think ill of me for this deed." "Not I, my child. I should not speak against yonder abbot, because he is my superior in the church, though, mind you, I owe him no allegiance, since this benefice is not in his gift, nor am I a Benedictine. Therefore I will tell you the truth. I hold the man not honest. All is provender that comes to his maw. Moreover, he is no Englishman, but a Spaniard, one sent here to work against the welfare of this realm, to suck its wealth, stir up rebellion, and make report of all that passes in it, for the benefit of England's enemies." "Yet he has friends at court, or so said my father." "Ay, ay, such folks have ever friends. Their money buys them, though mayhap an ill day is at hand for him and his likes. Well, your poor father is gone, God knows how, though I thought for long that would be his end, whoever spoke his mind, or more. And you with your wealth are the morsel that tempts Meldon's appetite. And now what is to be done? This is a hard case. Would you refuge in some other nunnery?" "Nay," answered Cicely, glancing sideways at her lover. "Then what's to be done?" "Oh, I know not," she said, bursting into a fit of weeping. "How can I tell you, who am mazed with grief and doubt? I had but a single friend, my father, though at times he was a rough one, yet he loved me in his way, and I have obeyed his last counsel." And, all her courage gone, she sank into a chair and rocked herself to and fro, her head resting on her hands. "That is not true," said Emmeline in her bold voice. "Am I who suckled you no friend, and is Father Necton here no friend, and is Sir Christopher no friend? Well, if you have lost your judgment, I have kept mine, and here it is. Yonder, not 2 bow-shots away, stands a church, and before me I see a priest and a pair who would serve for bride and bridegroom. Also, we can rake up witnesses and a cup of wine to drink your health, and after that let the abbot of Blossholme do his worst. What say you, Sir Christopher?" "You know my mind, Nurse Emmeline, but what says Cicely? Oh, Cicely, what say you?" And he bent over her. She raised herself, still weeping, and throwing her arms about his neck, laid her head upon his shoulder. "I think it is the will of God," she whispered, "and why should I fight against it, who am his servant? And yours, Chris?" "And now, father, what say you?" asked Emmeline, pointing to the pair. "I do not think there is much to say," answered the old clergyman, turning his head aside, "save that if it should please you to come to the church in 10 minutes' time, you will find a candle on the altar, and a priest within the rails, and a clerk to hold the book. More we cannot do at such short notice." Then he paused for a while, and, hearing no dissent, walked down the hall and out of the door. Emmeline took Cicely by the hand, led her to a room that was shown to them, and there made her ready for her bridal as best she might. She had no fine dress in which to clothe her, nor indeed would there have been time to don it, but she combed out her beautiful brown hair, and opening that box of Eastern jewels which were the great pride of the Fodderels, being the rarest and the most ancient in all the countryside, she decked her with them. On her broad brow she set a circlet from which hung sparkling diamonds that had been brought, the story said, by her mother's ancestor, a Carfax, from the Holy Land, where once they were the peculiar treasure of a Paynim queen, and upon her bosom a necklet of large pearls. Brooches and rings also she found for her breast and fingers, and for her waist a jewelled girdle with a golden clasp, while to her ears she hung the finest gems of all, 2 great pearls, pink like the hawthorn bloom when it begins to turn. Lastly, she flung over her head a veil of lace most curiously wrought, and stood back with pride to look at her. Now Cicely, who all this while had been silent and unresisting, spoke for the first time, saying, "How came this here, nurse?" "Your mother wore it at her bridal, and her mother too, so I have been told. Also, once before I wrapped it about you, when you were christened, sweet." "Mayhap, but how came it here?" "In the bosom of my robe. Not knowing when we should get home again, I brought it, thinking that perhaps one day you might marry, when it would be useful. And now, strangely enough, the marriage has come." "Emlyn, Emlyn, I believe that you planned all this business, whereof God alone knows the end." "That is why he makes a beginning, dear, that his end may be fulfilled in due season." "Ay, but what is that end? Mayhap this is my shroud you wrap about me. In truth, I feel as though death were near." "He is ever that," replied Emlyn unconcernedly. "But so long as he doesn't touch, what does it matter? Now hark you, sweetest. I've Spanish and gypsy blood in me, with which go gifts, and so I'll tell you something for your comfort. However oft he snatches, death will not lay his bony hand on you for many a long year, not till you are well nigh as thin with age as he is. Oh, you'll have your troubles, like all of us, worse than many, mayhap, but you are luck's own child, who lived when the rest were taken, and you'll win through and take others on your back, as a whale does barnacles. So snap your fingers at death, as I do," and she suited the action to the word, "and be happy while you may, and when you're not happy, wait till your turn comes round again. Now follow me, and, though your father was murdered, smile as you should in such an hour, for what man wants a sad-faced bride?" They walked down the broad oaken stairs into the hall where Christopher stood waiting for them. Glancing at him shyly, Cicely saw that he was clad in mail beneath his cloak, and that his sword was girded at his side, also that some men with him were armed. For a moment he stared at her glittering beauty confused, then said, "Fear not this hint of war in love's own hour," as he touched his shining armor. "Cicely, these nuptials are strange as they are happy, and some might try to break in upon them. Come now, my sweet lady," and bowing before her, he took her by the hand and led her from the house, Emlyn walking behind them, and the men with torches going before and following after. Outside it was freezing sharply, so that the snow crunched beneath their feet. In the west, the last red glow of sunset still lingered on the steely sky, and over against it the great moon rose above the round edge of the world. In the bushes of the garden and the tall poplars that bordered the moat, blackbirds and fieldfares chattered their winter evening song, while about the grey tower of the neighbouring church the daws still wheeled. The picture of that scene, whereof at the time she seemed to take no note, always remained fixed in the mind of Cicely. The cold expanse of snow, the inky trees, the hard sky, the lambent beams of the moon, the dull glow of the torches caught and reflected by her jewels and her lover's mail, the midwinter sound of birds, the barking of a distant hound, the black porch of the church that drew nearer, the little oblong mounds which hid the bones of hundreds who in their day had passed it as infants, as bridegrooms and as brides, and at last as cold white things that have been men and women. Now they were in the nave of the old fane, where the cold struck them like a sword. The dim lights of the torches showed them that, short as had been the time, the news of this marvellous marriage had spread about, for at least a score of people were standing here and there in knots, or a few of them seated on the oak benches near the chancel. All these turned to stare at them eagerly as they walked towards the altar, where stood the priest in his robes, and since his sight was dim, behind him the old clerk with the stable lantern held on high to enable him to read from his book. They reached the carven rood screen, and at a sign kneeled down. In a clear voice the clergyman began his service. Presently, at another sign, the pair rose, advanced to the altar rails, and again knelt down. The moonlight, flowing through the eastern window, fell full on both of them, turning them to cold, white statues, such as those that knelt in marble upon the tomb at their side. All through the holy office Cicely watched these statues with fascinated eyes, and it seemed to her that they and the old crusaders, harfleets of a long-past day who lay near-by, were watching her with a wistful and kindly interest. She made certain answers. A ring that was somewhat too small was thrust upon her finger. All the rest of her life that ring hurt her at times, but she would never have it moved. And then someone was kissing her. At first she thought it must be her father, and remembering, nearly wept, till she heard Christopher's voice calling her wife, and knew that she was wed. Father Roger, the old clerk still holding the lantern behind him, wrote something in a little vellum book, asking her the date of her birth and her full name, which, as he had been present at her christening, she thought strange. Then her husband signed the book, using the altar as a table, not very easily, for he was no great scholar, and she signed also in her maiden name for the last time, and the priest signed, and at his bidding Emlyn Stower, who could write well, signed too. Next, as though by an afterthought, Father Roger called several of the congregation, who rather unwillingly made their marks as witnesses. While they did so, he explained to them that, as the circumstances were uncommon, it was well that there should be evidence, and that he intended to send copies of this entry to sundry dignitaries, not forgetting the Holy Father at Rome. On learning this, they appeared to be sorry that they had anything to do with the matter, and one and all of them melted into the darkness of the nave, and out of Cicely's mind. So it was done at last. Father Nectum blew on his little book till the ink was dry, then hid it away in his robe. The old clerk, having pocketed a handsome fee from Christopher, lit the pair down the nave to the porch, where he locked the oaken door behind them, extinguished his lantern, and trudged off through the snow to the alehouse, there to discuss these nuptials and hot beer. Escorted by their torch-bearers, Cicely and Christopher walked silently arm in arm back to the towers, whither Emlyn, after embracing the bride, had already gone on ahead. So having added one more ceremony to its countless record, perhaps the strangest of them all, the ancient church behind them grew silent as the dead within its graves. The towers reached, the new-wed pair, with Father Roger and Emlyn, sat down to the best meal that could be prepared for them at such short notice, a very curious wedding feast. Still, though the company was so small, it did not lack for heartiness, since the old clergyman proposed their health in a speech full of Latin words which they did not understand, and every member of the household who had assembled to hear him drank to it in cups of wine. This done, the beautiful bride, now blushing and now pale, was led away to the best chamber, which had been hastily prepared for her. But Emlyn remained behind a while, for she had words to speak. "Sir Christopher," she said, "you are fast wed to the sweetest lady that ever sun or moon shone on, and in that may hold yourself a lucky man. Yet such deep joys seldom come without their pain, and I think that this is near at hand. There are those who will envy you your fortune, Sir Christopher." "Yet they cannot change it, Emlyn," he answered anxiously. "The knot that was tied tonight may not be unloosed." "Never," broke in Father Roger. "Though the suddenness and the circumstances of it may be unusual, this marriage is a sacrament celebrated in the face of the world with the full consent of both parties and of Holy Church. Moreover, before the dawn I'll send the record of it to the bishop's registry, and elsewhere, that it may not be questioned in days to come, giving copies of the same to you and your lady's foster-mother, who is her nearest friend at hand." "It may not be loosed on earth or in heaven," replied Emlyn solemnly, "yet perchance the sword can cut it. Sir Christopher, I think that we should all do well to travel as soon as may be." "Not tonight, surely, nurse!" he exclaimed. "No, not tonight," she answered, with a faint smile. "Your wife has had a weary day, and could not. Moreover, preparation must be made, which is impossible at this hour. But tomorrow, if the roads are open to you, I think we should start for London, where she may make complaint of her father's slaying, and claim her heritage, and the protection of the law." "That is good counsel," said the vicar, and Christopher, with whom words seemed to be few, nodded his head. "Meanwhile," went on Emlyn, "you have 6 men in this house, and others round it. Send out a messenger, and summon them all here at dawn, bidding them bring provision with them, and what bows and arms they have. Set a watch also, and after the father and the messenger have gone, command that the drawbridge be triced." "What do you fear?" he asked, waking from his dream. "I fear the abbot of Blossholme and his hired ruffians, who reck little of the laws, as the soul of dead Sir John knows now, or can use them as a cover to evil deeds. He'll not let such a prize slip between his fingers if he can help it, and the times are turbulent." Alas, alas, it is true, said Father Roger, and that abbot is a relentless man who sticks at nothing, having much wealth and many friends, both here and beyond the seas. Yet surely he would never dare— That we shall learn, interrupted Emlyn. Meanwhile, Sir Christopher, rouse yourself and give the orders. So Christopher summoned his men and spoke words to them, at which they looked very grave, but being true-hearted fellows who loved him, said they would do his bidding. A while later, having written out a copy of the marriage lines and witnessed it, Father Roger departed with the messenger. The drawbridge was hoisted above the moat, the doors were barred, and a man set to watch in the gateway tower, while Christopher, forgetful of all else, even of the danger in which they were, sought the company of her who waited for him. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 4. The Abbot's Oath. On the following morning, shortly after it was light, Christopher was called from his chamber by Emlyn, who gave him a letter. Whence came this? He asked, turning it over suspiciously. A messenger has brought it from Blossholme Abbey, she answered. Wife Cicely, he called through the door, come hither if you will. Presently she appeared, looking quaint and lovely in her long fur cloak, and having embraced her foster-mother, asked what was the matter. This, my darling, he answered, handing her the paper. I never loved book-learnings overmuch, and this morn I seem to hate them. Read, you who are more scholarly. I mistrust me of that great seal. It bodes us no good, Chris, she replied doubtfully, and paling a little. The message within is no meddler to soften by keeping, said Emlyn. Give it me. I was schooled in a nunnery, and can read their scrawls. So, nothing loath, Cicely handed her the paper, which she took in her strong fingers, broke the seal, snapped the silk, unfolded, and read. It ran thus: To Sir Christopher Harfleet, to Mistress Cicely Fotterell, to Emlyn Stower, the waiting-woman, and to all others whom it may concern. I, Clement Malden, Abbot of Blossholme, having heard of the death of Sir John Fotterell, knight, at the cruel hands of the forest thieves and outlaws, sent last night to serve the declaration of my wardship, according to my prerogative established by law and custom, over the person and property of you, Cicely, his only child surviving. My messengers returned, saying that you had fled from your home of Shufton Hall. They said further that it was rumored that you had ridden with your foster-mother, Emlyn Stower, to Cranwell Towers, the house of Sir Christopher Harfleet. If this be so, for the sake of your good name, it is needful that you should remove from such company at once, as there is talk about you and the said Sir Christopher Harfleet. I purpose, therefore, God permitting me, to ride this day to Cranwell Towers, and if you be there, as your lawful guardian and ghostly father, to command you, being an infant under age, to accompany me thence to the nunnery of Blossholme. There I have determined, in the exercise of my authority, you shall abide until a fitting husband is found for you, unless, indeed, God should move your heart to remain within its walls as one of the brides of Christ. Clement, Abbot. Now, when the reading of this letter was finished, the three of them stood a little while staring at each other, knowing well that it meant trouble for them all, till Cicely said, Bring me ink and paper, nurse. I will answer this abbot. So they were brought, and Cicely wrote in her round, girlish hand, My Lord Abbot, in answer to your letter, I would have you know that as my noble father, whose cruel death must be inquired of and avenged, bade me with his last words, I, fearing that a like fate would overtake me at the hands of his murderers, did, as you suppose, seek refuge at this house. Here yesterday I was married in the face of God and man in the church of Cranwell, as you may learn from the paper sent herewith. It is not, therefore, needful that you should seek a husband for me, since my dear lord, Sir Christopher Harfleet, and I are one till death do part us. Nor do I admit that now, or at any time, you had or have right of wardship over my person, or the lands and goods which I hold and inherit. Your humble servant, Cicely Harfleet. This letter Cicely copied out fair and sealed, and presently it was given to the abbot's messenger, who placed it in his pouch, and rode off as fast as the snow would let him. They watched him go from a window. "Now," said Christopher, turning to his wife, "I think, dear, we shall do well to ride also as soon as may be. Yonder abbot is sharp set, and I doubt whether letters will satisfy his appetite." "I think so also," said Emlyn. "Make ready and eat, both of you. I go to see that the horses are saddled." An hour later everything was prepared. 3 horses stood before the door, and with them an escort of 4 mounted men, who were all having arms and beasts to ride that Christopher could gather at such short notice, though other of his tenants and servants had already assembled at the towers in answer to his summons, to the number of 12 indeed. Without, the snow was falling fast, and although she tried to look brave and happy, Cicely shivered a little as she saw it through the open door. "We go on a strange honeymoon, my sweet," said Christopher uneasily. "What matters, so long as we go together?" she answered, in a gay voice that yet seemed to ring untrue. "Although," she added, with a little choke of the throat, "I would that we could have stayed here until I had found and buried my father. It haunts me to think of him lying somewhere in the snows, like a perished ox." "It is his murderers that I wish to bury," exclaimed Christopher, "and by God's name I swear I'll do it ere all is done. Think not, dear, that I forget your griefs, because I do not speak much of them, but bridals and buryings are strange company. So while we may, let us take what joy we can, since the ill that goes before ofttimes follows after also. Come, let us mount, and away to London to find friends and justice." Then, having spoken a few words to his housepeople, he lifted Cicely to her horse, and they rode out into the softly falling snow, thinking that they had seen their last of the towers for many a day. But this was not to be, for as they passed along the Blossholme highway, purposing to leave the abbey on their left, when they were about 3 miles from Cranwell, suddenly a tall fellow, who wore a great sheepskin coat with a monk's hood to it, and carried a thick staff in his hand, burst through the fence and stood in front of them. "Who are you?" asked Christopher, laying his hand upon his sword. "You'd know me well enough if my hood were back," he answered in a deep voice, "but if you want my name, it's Thomas Bull, cattle reeve to the abbey yonder." "Your voice proves you," said Christopher, laughing. "And now what is your business, lay brother Bull?" "To get up a bunch of yearling steers that have been running on the forest edge, living, like the rest of us, on what they can find, as the weather is coming on hard enough to starve them. That's my business, Sir Christopher, but as I see an old friend of mine there," and he nodded towards Emlyn, who was watching him from her horse, "with your leave, I'll ask her if she has any confession to make, since she seems to be in a dangerous journey." Now Christopher made as though he would push on, for he was in no mood to chat with cattle reeves, but Emlyn, who had been eyeing the man, called out, "Come here, Thomas, and I will answer you myself, who always have a few sins to spare for a priest's wallet, and need a blessing or two to warm me." He strode forward, and, taking her horse by the bridle, led it a little way apart, and as soon as they were out of earshot, fell into an eager conversation with its rider. A minute or so later, Cicely, looking round, for they had ridden forward at a slow pace, saw Thomas Bull leap through the other fence of the roadway and vanish at a run into the falling snow, while Emlyn spurred her horse after them. "Stop," she said to Christopher, "I have tidings for you. The abbot, with all his men-at-arms and servants, to the number of 40 or more, waits for us under shelter of Blossholme Grove yonder, purposing to take the Lady Cicely by force. Some spy has told him of this journey." "I see no one," said Christopher, staring at the grove, which lay below them about a quarter of a mile away, for they were on the top of a rise. "Still, the matter is not hard to prove," and he called to the 2 best mounted of his men, and bade them ride forward and make report if any lurked behind that wood. So the men went off, while they remained where they were, silent, but anxious enough. 10 minutes or so later, before they could see them, for the snow was now falling quickly, they heard the sound of many horses galloping. Then the 2 men appeared, calling out as they came, "The abbot and all his folk are after us! Back to Cranwell, ere you be taken!" Christopher thought for a moment. Then, remembering that with but 4 men, encumbered by 2 women, it was not possible to cut his way through so great a force, and admonished by that sound of advancing hoofs, he gave a sudden order. They turned about, and not too soon, for as they did so, scarce 200 yards away, the first of the abbot's horsemen appeared plunging towards them up the slope. Then the race began,
and well for them was it that their horses were good and fresh, since before ever they came in sight of Cranwell Towers, the pursuers were not 90 yards behind. But here on the flat their beasts, scenting home, answered nobly to whip and spur, and drew ahead a little. Moreover, those who watched within the house saw them, and ran to the drawbridge. When they were within 50 yards of the moat, Cicely's horse stumbled, slipped, and fell, throwing her into the snow, then recovered itself, and galloped on alone. Christopher reined up alongside of her, and, as she rose, frightened but unharmed, put out his long arm, and, lifting her to the saddle in front of him, plunged forward, while those behind shouted, "Yield!" Under this double burden his horse went but slowly. Still, they reached the bridge before any could lay hands upon them, and thundered over it. "Wind up!" shouted Christopher, and all there, even the womenfolk, laid hands upon the cranks. The bridge began to rise, but now 5 or 6 of the abbot's folk, dismounting, sprang at it, catching the end of it with their hands when it was about 6 feet in the air, and holding on so that it could not be lifted, but remained, moving neither up nor down. "Leave go, you knaves!" shouted Christopher, but by way of answer one of them, with the help of his fellows, scrambled on to the edge of the bridge, and stood there, hanging to the chains. Then Christopher snatched a bow from the hand of a serving man, and the arrow being already on the string, again shouted, "Get off at your peril!" In answer the man called out something about the commands of the Lord Abbot. Christopher, looking past him, saw that others of the company had dismounted, and were running towards the bridge. If they reached it, he knew well that the game was played. So he hesitated no longer, but, aiming swiftly, drew and loosed the bow. At that distance he could not miss. The arrow struck the man where his steel cap joined the mail beneath, and pierced him through the throat, so that he fell back dead. The others, scared by his fate, loosed their hold, so that now the bridge, relieved of the weight upon it, instantly rose up beyond their reach, and presently came home and was made fast. As they afterwards discovered, this man, it may here be said, was a captain of the abbot's guard. Moreover, it was he who had shot the arrow that killed Sir John Fothergill some 40 hours before, striking him through the throat, as it was fated that he himself should be struck. Thus, then, one of that good knight's murderers reaped his just reward. Now the men ran back out of range, for they feared more arrows, while Christopher watched them go in silence. Cicely, who stood by his side, her hands held before her face to shut out the sight of death, let them fall suddenly, and, turning to her husband, said, as she pointed to the corpse that lay upon the blood-stained snow of the roadway, "How many more will follow him, I wonder? I think that is but the first throw of a long game, husband." "Nay, sweet," he answered, "the second. The first was cast 2 nights gone by Kingsgrave Mount in the forest yonder, and blood ever calls for blood." "Ay," she answered, "blood calls for blood." Then, remembering that she was orphaned, and what sort of a honeymoon hers was like to be, she turned and sought her chamber, weeping. Now, while Christopher still stood irresolute, for he was oppressed by the sense of this manslaying, and knew not what he should do next, he saw 3 men separate from the knot of soldiers and ride towards the towers, one of whom held a white cloth above his head, in token of parley. Then Christopher went up into the little gateway turret, followed by Emmeline, who crouched down behind the brick battlement, so that she could see and hear without being seen. Having reached the further side of the moat, he who held the white cloth threw back the hood of his long cape, and they saw that it was the abbot of Blossholme himself, also that his dark eyes flashed, and that his olive-hued face was almost white with rage. "Why do you hunt me across my own park, and come knocking so rudely at my doors, my lord abbot?" asked Christopher, leaning on the parapet of the gateway. "Why do you work murder on my servant, Christopher Harfleet?" answered the abbot, pointing to the dead man in the snow. "Know you not that whoso sheds blood, by man shall his blood be shed, and that under our ancient charters, here I have the right to execute justice on you, as, by God's holy name, I swear that I will do?" he added in a choked voice. "Ay," repeated Christopher reflectively, "by man shall his blood be shed. Perhaps that is why this fellow died. Tell me, abbot, was he not of those who rode by moonlight round King's Grave lately, and there chanced to meet Sir John Fothergill?" The shot was a random one, yet it seemed that it went home. At least, the abbot's jaw dropped, and some words that were on his lips never passed them. "I know naught of the meaning of your talk," he said presently in a quieter voice, or of how my late friend and neighbor, Sir John, may God rest his soul, came to his end. Yet it is of him, or rather of his, that we must speak. It seems that you have stolen his daughter, a woman under age, and by pretense of a false marriage, as I fear, brought her to shame, a crime even fouler than his murder. Nay, by means of a true marriage I have brought her to such small honour as may be the share of Christopher Harfleet's lawful wife. If there be any virtue in the rites of Holy Church, then God's own hand has bound us fast as man can be tied to woman, and death is the only pope who can loose that knot. Death, repeated the abbot in a slow voice, looking up at him very curiously. For a little while he was silent, then went on. Well, his court is always open, and he has many shrewd and instant messengers, such as this. And he pointed to the arrow in the neck of the slain soldier. Yet I am a man of peace, and although you have murdered my servant, I would settle our cause more gently if I may. Listen now, Sir Christopher, here is my offer. Yield up to me the person of Cicely Fotterel. Of Cicely Harfleet, interrupted Christopher. Of Cicely Fotterel, and I swear to you that no violence shall be done to her, nor shall she be given to a husband till the king or his vicar general, or whatever court he may appoint, has passed judgment in this matter, and declared this mock marriage of yours null and void. What, broke in Christopher scoffingly, does the abbot of Blossholme announce that his powers temporal of this realm have right of divorce? Ere now I have heard him argue differently, and so have others, when the case of Queen Catherine was in question. The abbot bit his lip, but continued, taking no heed. Nor will I lay any complaint against you as to the death of my servant here, for which otherwise you should hang. That I will write down as an accident, and, further, compensate his family. Now you have my offer. Answer. And what if I refuse this same generous offer to surrender her, whom I hold dearer than 1,000 lives? Then, by virtue of my rights and authority, I will take her by force, Christopher Harfleet, and if harm should happen to come to you, now or hereafter, on your own head be it. At this Christopher's rage broke out. Do you dare to threaten me, a loyal Englishman, you false priest and foreign traitor, he shouted, whom all men know to be in the pay of Spain, and using the cover of a monk's dress to plot against the land on which you fatten like a horse-leech? Why was John Fotterel murdered in the forest 2 nights gone? You won't answer? Then I will. Because he rode to court to prove the truth about you and your treachery, and therefore you butchered him. Why do you claim my wife as your ward? Because you wish to steal her lands and goods to feed your plots and luxury. You think you have brought friends at court, and that for money's sake those in power there will turn a blind eye to your crimes. So it may be for a while, but wait, wait. All eyes are not blind yonder, nor all ears deaf. That head of yours shall yet be lifted higher than you think, so high that it sticks upon the top of Blossholme towers, a warning to all who would sell England to her enemies. John Fotterel lies dead with your knave's arrow in his throat, but Geoffrey Stokes is away with the writings. And now do your worst, Clement Malden. If you want my wife, come take her. The abbot listened intently, drinking in every ominous word. His swarthy face went white with fear, then turned black with rage. The veins upon his forehead gathered into knots. Even from that distance Christopher could see them. He looked so evil that his countenance became twisted and ridiculous, and Christopher, noting it, burst into one of his hearty laughs. The abbot, who was not accustomed to mockery, whispered something to the 2 men who were with him, whereon suddenly they lifted the crossbows which they carried and pulled the trigger. One quarrel went wide, and hit the wall of the house behind, where it stuck fast in the joints of the stud-work. But the other, better aimed, smote Christopher above the heart, causing him to stagger, but being shot from below, and turned by the mail he wore, glanced upwards over his left shoulder. The men, seeing that he was unhurt, pulled their horses round and galloped off, but Christopher, setting another arrow to the string of the bow he carried, drew it to his ear, covering the abbot. "Loose, and make an end of him," muttered Emmeline from her shelter behind the parapet, but Christopher thought for a moment, then cried, "Stay a while, Sir Abbot, I have more to say to you." He took no heed who was also turning about. "Stay!" thundered Christopher, "or I will kill that fine nag of yours." Then, as the abbot still dragged upon the reins, he let the arrow fly. The aim was true enough. Right through the arch of the neck it sped, cutting the core between the bones, so that the poor beast reared straight up and fell in a heap, tumbling its rider off into the snow. "Now, Clement Malden," cried Christopher. "Will you listen, or will you bide with your horse and servant, and hear no more till Judgment Day? If you do not guess it, learn that I have practiced archery from my youth. Should you doubt, hold up your hand, and I'll send a shaft between your fingers." The abbot, who was shaken but unhurt, rose slowly and stood there, the dead horse on one side, and the dead man on the other. "Speak," he said in a muffled voice. "My lord abbot," went on Christopher, "a minute ago you tried to murder me, and, had not my mail been good, would have succeeded. Now your life is in my hand, for as you have seen, I do not miss. Those servants of yours are coming to your help. Call to them to halt, or—" and he lifted the bow. The abbot obeyed, and the men, understanding, stayed where they were, at a distance, but within earshot. "You have a crucifix upon your breast," continued Christopher. "Take it in your right hand now, and swear an oath." Again the abbot obeyed. "Swear thus," he said, Emlyn, who was crouched beneath the parapet, prompting him from time to time. "I, Clement Maldon, abbot of Blossholme, in the presence of Almighty God in heaven, and of Christopher Harfleet and others upon earth," and he jerked his head backwards towards the windows of the house, where all therein were gathered, listening, "make oath upon the symbol of the Rood. I swear that I abandon all claim of wardship over the body of Cicely Harfleet, born Cicely Fotterel, the lawful wife of Christopher Harfleet, and all claim to the lands and goods that she may possess, or that were possessed by her father, John Fotterel, knight, or by her mother, Dame Fotterel, deceased. I swear that I will raise no suit in any court, spiritual or temporal, of this or other realms against the said Cicely Harfleet, or against the said Christopher Harfleet, her husband, nor seek to work injury to their bodies or their souls, or to the bodies or the souls of any who cling to them, and that henceforth they may live and die in peace from me, or any whom I control. Set your lips to the Rood, and swear this now, Clement Maldon." The abbot hearkened, and so great was his rage, for he had no meek heart, that it seemed to swell like an angry toad. "Who gave you authority to administer oaths to me?" he asked at length. "I'll not swear," and he cast the crucifix down upon the snow. "Then I'll shoot," answered Christopher. "Come, pick up that cross." But Maldon stood silent, his arms folded on his breast. Christopher aimed and loosed, and so great was his skill, for there were few archers in England like to him, that the arrow pierced Maldon's fur cap and carried it away without touching the shaven head beneath. "The next shall be 2 inches lower," he said, as he set another on the string. "I waste no more good shafts." Then, very slowly, to save his life, which he loved well enough, Maldon bent down, and, lifting the crucifix from the snow, held it to his lips and kissed it, muttering, "I swear." But the oath he swore was very different to that which Christopher had repeated to him, for, like a hunted fox, he knew how to meet guile with guile. "Now that I, a consecrated abbot, deeming it right that I should live on to fulfill my work on earth, have done your bidding, have I leave to go about my business, Christopher Harfleet?" he asked, with bitter irony. "Why not?" asked Christopher. "Only be pleased henceforth not to meddle with me in my business. Tomorrow I wish to ride to London with my lady, and we do not seek your company on the road." Then, having found his cap, the abbot turned and walked back towards his own men, drawing the arrow from it as he went, and presently all of them rode away over the rise toward Blossholme. "Now that is well finished, and I have an oath that he will scarcely dare to break," said Christopher presently. "What say you, nurse?" "I say that you are even a bigger simpleton than I took you to be," answered Emlyn angrily, as she rose and stretched herself, for her limbs were cramped. "The oath, pshaw! By now he is absolved from it, as given under fear. Did you not hear me whisper to you to put an arrow through his heart, instead of playing boys' pranks with his cap?" "I did not wish to kill an abbot, nurse." "Foolish man! What is the difference in such a matter between him and one of his servants? Moreover, he will only say that you tried to slay him, and missed, and produce the cap and arrow in evidence against you. Well, my talk serves nothing to mend a bad matter, and soon you will hear it straighter from himself. Go now and make your house ready for attack, and never dare to set a foot without its doors, for death waits you there." Emlyn was right. Within 3 hours an unarmed monk trudged up to Cranwell Towers, through the falling snow, and cast across the moat a letter that was tied to a stone. Then he nailed a writing to one of the oak posts of the outer gate, and, without a word, departed as he had come. In the presence of Christopher and Cicely, Emlyn opened and read this second letter, as she had read the first. It was short, and ran: "Take notice, Sir Christopher Harfleet, and all others whom it may concern, that the oath which I, Clement Malden, Abbot of Blossholme, swore to you this day, is utterly void, and of none effect, having been wrung from me under the threat of instant death. Take notice further that a report of the murder which you have done has been forwarded to the King's Grace, and to the sheriff and other officers of this county, and that by virtue of my rights and authority, ecclesiastical and civil, I shall proceed to possess myself of the person of Cicely Fotterell, my ward, and of the lands and other property held by her father, Sir John Fotterell, deceased, upon the former of which I have already entered on her behalf, and by exercise of such force as may be needful to seize you, Christopher Harfleet, and to hand you over to justice. Further, by means of notice sent herewith, I warn all that cling to you and abet you in your crimes, that they will do so at the peril of their souls and bodies. Clement Malden, Abbot of Blossholme. End of Chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 5. What Passed at Cranwell. A week had gone by. For the first 3 days of that time, little of note had happened at Cranwell Towers. That is, no assault was delivered. Only Christopher and his dozen or so of house servants and small tenants discovered that they were quite surrounded. Once or twice, some of them rode out a little way, to be hunted back again by a much superior force, which emerged from the copses near by or from cottages in the village, and even from the porch of the church. With these men they never came to close quarters, so that no lives were lost. In a fashion this was a disadvantage to them, since they lacked the excitement of actual fighting, the dread of which was ever present, but not its joy. Meanwhile, in other ways, things went ill with them. Thus, first of all their beer gave out, and then such other cordials as they had, so that they were reduced to water to drink. Next their fuel became exhausted, for nearly all the stock of it was kept at the farmstead about a quarter of a mile away, and on the second day of the siege this stead was fired and burned with its contents, the cattle and horses being driven off, they knew not where. So it came about that at length they could keep only one fire in the kitchen, and that but small, which in the end they were obliged to feed with the doors of the outhouses, and even with the floorings torn out of the attics, in order that they might cook their food. Nor was there much of this, only a store of salt meat, and some pickled pork and smoked bacon, together with a certain amount of oatmeal and flour, that they made into cakes and bread. On the 4th day, however, these gave out, so that they were reduced to a scanty diet of hung flesh, with a few apples by way of vegetables, and hot water to drink to warm them. At length, too, there was nothing more to burn, and therefore they must eat their meat raw, and grew sick on it. Moreover, a cold thaw set in, and the house grew icy, so that they moved about in it with chattering teeth, and at night, ill-nurtured as they were, could scarce keep the life in them beneath all the coverings which they had. Ah, how long were those nights, with never a blaze upon the hearth, or so much as a candle to light them! At 4 o'clock the darkness came down, which did not lessen, for the moon grew low and the mists were thick, until day broke about 7 on the following morning. And all this time, fearing attack, they must keep watch and ward through the gloom, so that even sleep was denied them. For a while they bore up bravely, even the tenants, though news was shouted to these that their steads had been harried, and their wives and children hunted off to seek shelter where they might. Cicely and Emlyn never murmured. Indeed, this new-made wife kept her dreadful honeymoon with a cheerful face, trudging through the black hours around the circle of the moat at her husband's side, or from window-place to window-place in the empty rooms, till at length they cast themselves down upon some bed to sleep awhile, giving over the watch to others. Only Emlyn never seemed to sleep, but at length their companions did begin to murmur. One morning at the dawn, after a very bitter night, they waited upon Christopher and told him that they were willing to fight for his sake and his lady's, but that, as there was no hope of help, they could no longer freeze and starve. In short, that they must either escape from the house or surrender. He listened to them patiently, knowing that what they said was true, and then consulted for a while with Cicely and Emlyn. "Our case is desperate, dear wife. Now what shall we do?
who have no chance of succor, since none know of our plight. Yield, or strive to escape through the darkness? Not yield, I think, answered Cicely, choking back a sob. If we yield, certainly they will separate us, and that merciless abbot will bring you to your death, and me to a nunnery. That may happen in any case, muttered Christopher, turning his head aside. But what say you, nurse? I say fight for it, answered Emmeline boldly. It is certain that we cannot stay here, for, to be plain, Sir Christopher, there are some among us whom I do not trust. What wonder? Their stomachs are empty, their hands are blue, their wives and children are they know not where, and the heavy curse of the church hangs over them, all of which things may be mended if they play you false. Let us take what horses remain, and slip away at dead of night if we can, or if we cannot, then let us die, as many better folk have done before. So they agreed to try their fortune, thinking that it was so bad it could not be worse, and spent the rest of that day in getting ready as best they could. The 7 horses still stood in the stable, and although they were stiff from want of exercise, had been hay-fed and watered. On these they proposed to ride, but first they must tell the truth to those who had stood by them. So about 3 o'clock of the afternoon Christopher called all the men together beneath the gateway, and sorrowfully set out his tale. Here, he showed them, they could bide no longer, and to surrender meant that his new-wed wife would soon be made a widow. Therefore they must fly, taking with them as many as there were horses for them to ride, if they cared to risk such a journey. If not, he and the 2 women would go alone. Now 4 of the stoutest-hearted of them, men who had served him and his father for many years, stepped forward, saying that, evil as these seemed to be, they would follow his fortunes to the last. He thanked them shortly, whereon one of the others asked what they were to do, and if he proposed to desert them after leading them into this plight. God knows I would rather die, he replied, with a swelling heart. But, my friends, consider the case. If I bide here, what of my wife? Alas, it has come to this, that you must choose whether you will slip out with us and scatter in the woods, where I think you will not be followed, since yonder abbot has no quarrel against you, or whether you will wait here, and tomorrow at the dawn surrender. In either event, you can say that I compelled you to stand by us, and that you have shed no man's blood. Also, I will give you a writing. So they talked together gloomily, and at last announced that when he and their lady went, they would go also, and get off as best as they could. But there was a man among them, a small farmer, named Jonathan Dixey, who thought otherwise. This Jonathan, who held his land under Christopher, had been forced to this business of the defence of Cranwell Towers somewhat against his will, namely, by the pressure of Christopher's largest tenant, to whose daughter he was affianced. He was a sly young man, and even during the siege, by means that need not be described, he had contrived to convey a message to the abbot of Blossholme, telling him that had it been in his power, he would gladly be in any other place. Therefore, as he knew well, whatever had happened to others, his farm remained unharried. Now he determined to be out of a bad business as soon as he might, for Jonathan was one of those who liked to stand upon the winning side. Therefore, although he said, "Aye, aye," more loudly than his comrades, so soon as the dusk had fallen, while the others were making ready the horses and mounting guard, Jonathan thrust a ladder across the moat at the back of the stable, and clambered along its rungs into the shelter of a cattle shed in the meadow, and so away. Half an hour later he stood before the abbot in the cottage where he had taken up his quarters, having contrived to blunder among his people and be captured. To him at first Jonathan would say nothing, but when at length they threatened to take him out and hang him, to save his life, as he said, he found his tongue and told all. So, said the abbot, when he had finished. Now God is good to us. We have these birds in our net, and I shall keep St. Hilary's at Blossholme after all. For your service, Master Dixey, you shall be my reeve at Cranwell Towers when they are in my hands. But here it may be said that in the end things went otherwise, since, so far from getting the stewardship of Cranwell, when the truth came to be known, Jonathan's maiden would have no more to do with him, and the folk in those parts sacked his farm and hunted him out of the county, so that he was never heard of among them again. Meanwhile, all being ready, Christopher at the Towers was closeted with Cicely, taking his farewell of her in the dark, for no light was left to them. "This is a desperate venture," he said to her, "nor can I tell how it will end, or if ever I shall see your sweet face again. Yet, dearest, we have been happy together for some few hours, and if I fall and you live on, I am sure that you will always remember me till, as we are taught, We meet again, for no enemy has the power to torment us, and cold and hunger and darkness are not. Cicely, if that should be so, and any child should come to you, teach it to love the father whom it never saw." Now she threw her arms about him and wept, and wept, and wept. "If you die," she sobbed, "surely I will do so also, for although I am but young, I find this world a very evil place, and now that my father is gone, without you, husband, it would be a hell." "Nay, nay," he answered, "live on while you may, for who knows? Often out of the worst comes the best. At least we have had our joy. Swear it now, sweet." "Ay, if you will swear it also, for I may be taken and you left. In the dark, swords do not choose. Let us promise that we will both endure our lives, together or separate, until God calls us." So they swore there in the icy gloom, and sealed the oath with kisses. Now the time was come at last, and they crept their way to the courtyard hand in hand, taking some comfort because the night was very favourable to their project. The snow had melted, and a great gale blew from the southwest, boisterous but not cold, which caused the tall elms that stood about to screech and groan like things alive. In such a wind as this they were sure that they would not be heard, nor could they be seen beneath that murky, starless sky, while the rain which fell between the gusts would wash out the footprints of their horses. They mounted silently, and with the 4 men, for by now all the rest had gone, rode across the drawbridge, which had been lowered in preparation for their flight. 300 yards or so away their road ran through an ancient marl pit worked out generations before, in which self-sown trees grew on either side of the path. As they drew near this place, suddenly, in the silence of the night, a horse neighed ahead of them, and one of their beasts answered to the neigh. "Halt!" whispered Cicely, whose ears were made sharp by fear. "I hear men moving." They pulled rein and listened. Yes, between the gusts of wind there was a faint sound as of the clanking of armor. They strained their eyes in the darkness, but could see nothing. Again the horse neighed and was answered. One of their servants cursed the beast beneath his breath, and struck it savagely with the flat of his sword, whereon, being fresh, it took the bit between its teeth and bolted. Another minute, and there arose a great clamour from the marl pit in front of them, a noise of shoutings, of sword strokes, and then a heavy groan as from the lips of a dying man. "An ambush!" exclaimed Christopher. "Can we get round?" asked Cicely, and there was terror in her voice. "Nay," he answered, "the stream is in flood. We should be bogged. Hark, they charge us! Back to the towers! There is no other way!" So they turned and fled, followed by shouts and the thunder of many horses galloping. In 2 minutes they were there, and across the bridge, the women, Christopher, and the 3 men who were left. "Up with the bridge!" cried Christopher, and they leapt from their saddles and fumbled for the cranks. Too late, for already the abbot's horsemen pressed it down. Then a fight began. The horses of the enemy shrank back from the trembling bridge, so their riders, dismounting, rushed forward, to be met by Christopher and his 3 remaining men, who in that narrow place were as good as 100. Wild, random blows were struck in the darkness, and, as it chanced, 2 of the abbot's people fell, whereon a deep voice cried, "Come back and wait for light!" When they had gone, dragging off their wounded with them, Christopher and his servants again strove to wind up the bridge, only to find that it would not stir. "Some traitor has fouled the chains," he said, in the quiet voice of despair. "Cicely and Emlyn, get you into the house. I and any who will buy with me stay here to see this business out. When I am down, yield yourself. Afterwards, I think that the king will give you justice, if you can come to him." "I'll not go," she wailed. "I'll die with you." "Nay, you shall go," he said, stamping his foot, and as he spoke, an arrow hissed between them. "Emlyn, drag her hence ere she is shot. Swift, I say, swift, or God's curse and mine rest on you. Unclasp your arms, wife. How can I fight while you hang about my neck? What, must I strike you? Then, there and there." She loosed her grasp, and, groaning, fell back upon the breast of Emlyn, who half led, half carried her across the courtyard, where their scared horses galloped loose. "Whither go we?" sobbed Cicely. "To the central tower," answered Emlyn. "It seemed safest there." To this tower, whence the place took its name, they groped their way. Unlike the rest of the house, which for the most part was of wood, it was built of stone, being part of an older fabric dating from the Norman days. Slowly they stumbled up the steps, till at length they reached the roof, for some instinct prompted them to find a spot whence they could see, should the stars break out. Here, on this lofty perch, they crouched them down and waited the end, whatever it might be, waited in silence. A while passed. They never knew how long, till at length a sudden flame shot up above the roof of the kitchens at the rear, which the wind caught and blew on to the timbers of the main building, so that presently this began to blaze also. The house had been fired, by whom was never known, though it was said that the traitor, Jonathan Dixey, had returned and done it, either for a bribe or that his own sin might be forgotten in this great catastrophe. "The house burns," said Emmeline in her quiet voice. "Now, if you would save your life, follow me. Beneath this tower is a vault, where no flame can touch us." But Cicely would not stir, for by the fierce and ever-growing light she could see what passed beneath, and, as it chanced, the wind blew the smoke away from them. There, beyond the drawbridge, were gathered the abbey guards, and there in the gateway stood Christopher and his 3 men with drawn swords, while in the courtyard the horses galloped madly, screaming in their fear. A soldier looked up and saw the 2 women standing on the top of the tower, then called out something to the abbot, who sat on horseback near to him. He looked and saw also. "Yield, Sir Christopher," he shouted. "The Lady Cicely burns. Yield, that we may save her." Christopher turned and saw also. For a moment he hesitated, then wheeled round to run across the courtyard. Too late, for as he came the flames burst through the main roof of the house, and the timber front of it, blazing furiously, fell outwards, blocking the doorway, so that the place became a furnace into which none might enter and live. Now a madness seemed to take hold of him. For a moment he stared up at the figures of the 2 women standing high above the rolling smoke and wrapping flame. Then, with his 3 men, he charged with a roar into the crowd of soldiers who had followed him into the courtyard, striving, it would seem, to cut his way to the abbot, who lurked behind. It was a dreadful sight, for he and those with him fought furiously, and many went down. Presently, of the 4 only Christopher was left upon his feet. Swords and spears smote upon his armor, but he did not fall. It was those in front of him who fell. A great fellow with an axe got behind him and struck with all his might upon his helm. The sword dropped from Harfleet's hand. Slowly he turned about, looked upward, then stretched out his arms and fell heavily to earth. The abbot leapt from his horse and ran to him, kneeling at his side. "Dead!" he cried, and began to shrive his passing soul, or so it seemed. "Dead!" repeated Emmeline, "and a gallant death." "Dead!" wailed Cicely, in so terrible a voice that all below heard it. "Dead! Dead!" and sank senseless on Emmeline's breast. At that moment the rest of the roof fell in, hiding the tower in spouts and veils of flame. Here they might not stay if they would live. Lifting her mistress in her strong arms, as she was wont to do when she was little, Emmeline found the head of the stair, so that when the wind blew the smoke aside for an instant, those below saw that both had vanished, as they thought withered in the fire. "Now you can enter on the Shefton lands, abbot," cried a voice from the darkness of the gateway, though in the turmoil none knew who spoke. "But not for all England would I bear that innocent blood." The abbot's face turned ghastly, and though it was hot enough in that courtyard, his teeth chattered. "It is on the head of this woman thief," he exclaimed with an effort, looking down on Christopher, who lay at his feet. "Take him up, that inquest may be held on him, who died doing murder. Can none enter the house? His pocket full of gold, to him who saves the Lady Cicely." "Can any enter hell and live?" answered the same voice out of the smoke and gloom. "Seek her sweet soul in heaven, if you may come there, abbot." Then, with scared faces, they lifted up Christopher and the other dead and wounded, and carried them away, leaving Cranwell Towers to burn itself to ashes, for so fierce was the heat that none could bide there longer. 2 hours had gone by. The abbot sat in the little room of a cottage at Cranwell that he had occupied during the siege of the Towers. It was near midnight, yet, weary as he was, he could not rest. Indeed, had the night been less foul and dark, he would have spent the time in riding back to Blossholme. His heart was ill at ease. Things had gone well with him, it is true. Sir John Fotherell was dead, slain by outlawed men. Sir Christopher Harfleet was dead. Did not his body lie in the neat house yonder? Cicely, daughter of the one and wife to the other, was dead also, burned in the fire at the Towers, so that doubtless the precious gems and the wide lands he coveted would fall into his lap without further trouble. For, Cromwell being bribed, who would try to snatch them from the powerful abbot of Blossholme, and had he not a title to them, of a sort? and yet he was very ill at ease, for, as that voice had said, whose voice was it, he wondered? Somehow it seemed familiar. The blood of these people lay on his head, and there came into his mind the text of Holy Writ which he had quoted to Christopher, that he who shed man's blood, by man should his blood be shed. Also, although he had paid the vicar general to back him, monks were in no great favour at the English court, and if this story travelled there, as it might, for even the strengthless dead find friends, it was possible that questions would be asked, questions hard to answer. Before heaven he could justify himself for all that he had done, but before King Henry, who would usurp the powers of the very Pope, if the truth should chance to reach the royal ear, that was another matter. The room was cold after the heat of that great fire. His southern blood, which had been warm enough, grew chill. Loneliness and depression took hold of him. He began to wonder how far, in the eyes of God above, the end justifies the means. He opened the door of the place, and holding on to it lest the rough, wintry gale should tear it from its frail hinges, shouted aloud for Brother Martin, one of his chaplains. Presently Martin arrived, emerging from the cattle shed, a lantern in his hand, a tall, thin man, with perplexed and melancholy eyes, long nose, and a clever face, and, bowing, asked his superior's pleasure. "My pleasure, brother," answered the abbot, "is that you shut the door and keep out the wind, for this accursed climate is killing me. Yes, make up the fire if you can, but the wood is too wet to burn, also it smokes. There, what did I tell you? If this goes on, we shall be hams by tomorrow morning. Let it be, for, after all, we have seen enough of fires tonight. And sit down to a cup of wine. Nay, I forgot, you drink but water. Well then, to a bite of bread and meat." "I thank you, my lord abbot," answered Martin, "but I may not touch flesh. This is Friday." "Friday or no, we have touched flesh, the flesh of men, up at the towers yonder this night," answered the abbot with an uneasy laugh. "Still, obey your conscience, brother, and eat bread. Soon it will be midnight, and the meat can follow." The lean monk bowed, and, taking a hunch of bread, began to bite at it, for he was almost starving. "Have you come from watching by the body of that bloody and rebellious man who has worked us so much harm and loss?" asked the abbot presently. The secretary nodded, then swallowing a crust, said, "Aye, I have been praying over him and the others. At least he was brave, and it must be hard to see one's new-wed wife burn like a witch. Also, now that I come to study the matter, I know not what his sin was, who did but fight bravely when he was attacked. For without doubt the marriage is good, and whether he should have waited to ask your leave to make it is a point that might be debated through very court in Christendom." The abbot frowned, not appreciating this open and judicial tone in matters that touched him so nearly. "You have honoured me of late by choosing me as one of your confessors, though I think you do not tell me everything, my lord abbot. Therefore I bear my mind to you," continued Brother Martin apologetically. "Speak on, then, man. What do you mean?" "I mean that I do not like this business," he answered slowly, in the intervals of munching at his bread. "You had a quarrel with Sir John Fotherell about those lands which you say belong to the abbey. God knows the right of it, for I understand no law, but he denied it, for did I not hear it yonder in your chamber at Blossholme? He denied it, and accused you of treason enough to hang all Blossholme, of which again God knows the truth. You threatened him in your anger, but he and his servant were armed, and won out, and next day the two of them rode for London with certain papers. Well, that night Sir John Fotherell was killed in the forest, though his servant Stokes escaped with the papers. Now, who killed him?" The abbot looked at him, then seemed to take a sudden resolution. "Our people, those men-at-arms whom I have gathered for the defence of our house and the church. My orders to them were to seize him living, but the old English bull would not yield, and fought so fiercely that it ended otherwise, to my sorrow." The monk put down his bread, for which he seemed to have no further appetite. "A dreadful deed," he said, "for which one day you must answer to God and man." "For which we all must answer," corrected the abbot, "down to the last lay brother and soldier, you as much as any of us, brother, for were you not present at our quarrel?" "So be it, abbot. Being innocent, I am ready. But that is not the end of it. The Lady Cicely, on hearing of this murder, nay, be not wrath, for I know no other name for it, and learning that you claimed her as your ward, flies to her affianced lover, Sir Christopher Harfleet, and that very day is married to him by the parish priest in yonder church. It was no marriage. Due notice had not been given. Moreover, how could my ward be wed without my leave? She had not been served with notice of your wardship, if such exists, or so she declared, replied Martin in his quiet, obstinate voice. I think that there is no court in Europe which would void this open marriage when it learned that the parties lived a while as man and wife, and were so received by those about them. No, not the Pope himself. He who says that he is no lawyer still sets out the law, broke in Maldon sarcastically. Well, what does it matter, seeing that death has voided it? Husband and wife, if such they were, are both dead. It is finished. No, for now they lay their appeal in the court of heaven, to which every one of us is summoned, and heaven can stir up its ministers on earth. Oh, I like it not, and I mourn for those two, so loving, brave, and young. Their blood, and that of many more, is on our hands. For what? A stretch of upland and of marsh, which the king or others may seize tomorrow. The abbot seemed to cower beneath the weight of these sad, earnest words, and for a little while there was silence. Then he plucked up courage, and said, I am glad that you remember that their blood is on your hands as well as mine, since now, perhaps, you will keep them hidden. He rose and walked to the door and the window to see that none were without, then returned, and exclaimed fiercely, Fool, do you then think that these deeds were done to win a new estate? True it is that those lands are ours by right, and we need the revenues, but there is more behind. The whole church of this realm is threatened by that accursed son of Belial who sits upon the throne. Why, what is it now, man? Only that I am an Englishman, and love not to hear England's king called a son of Belial. His sins, I know, are many and black, like those of others. Still, son of Belial! Let his highness hear it, and that name alone is enough to hang you. Well then, angel of grace, if it suits you better. At the least we are threatened. Against the law of God and man, our blessed queen, Catherine of Spain, is thrust away in favor of the slut who fills her place. Even now I have tidings from Kimbolton that she lies dying there of slow poison. So they say, and I believe. Also, I have other tidings. Fisher and Moore being murdered, Parliament next month will be moved to strike at the lesser monasteries and steal their goods, and after them our turn will come. But we will not bear it tamely, for ere this new year is out, all England shall be ablaze, and I, Clement Maldon, I will light the fire. Now you have the truth, Martin. Will you betray me, as that dead knight would have done? Nay, my lord abbot, your secrets are safe with me. Am I not your chaplain, and does not this wilful and rebellious king of ours work such mischief against God and his servants? Yet I tell you that I like it not, and cannot see the end. We English are a stiff-necked folk, whom you of Spain do not understand, and will never break. And Henry is strong and subtle. Moreover, his people love him. I knew that I could trust you, Martin, and the proof of it is that I have spoken to you so openly, went on Maldon in a gentler voice. Well, you shall hear all. The great Emperor of Germany and Spain is on our side, as, seeing his blood and faith, he must be. He will avenge the wrongs of the Church and of his royal aunt. I, who know him, am his agent here, and what I do is done at his bidding. But I must have more money than he finds me, and that is why I stirred in this matter of the Shefton lands. Also, the Lady Cicely had jewels of vast price, though I feared greatly lest they should have been lost in the fire this night. Filthy lucre, the root of all evil, muttered Brother Martin. Ay, and of all good. Money, money. I must have more money to bribe men and buy arms, to defend that stronghold of heaven, the Church. What matters it if lives are lost, so that the immortal Church holds her own? Let them go. My friend, you are fearful. These deaths weigh upon your soul, ay, and on mine. I loved that girl, whom as a babe I held in my arms, and even her rough father, I loved him for his honest heart, although he always mistrusted me, the Spaniard, and rightly. The knight Harfleet, too, who lies yonder, he was of a brave breed, but not one who would have served our turn. Well, they are gone, and for these bloodsheddings we must find absolution. If we can. Oh, we can. Already I have it in my pouch, under a seal, you know. And for our bodies, fear not. There is such a gale rising in England as will blow out this petty breeze. A question of rights, some arrows shot, a fire, and lives lost. What of that, when it agitates betwixt powers temporal and spiritual, and which of them shall hold the sceptre in this mighty Britain? Martin, I have a mission for you that may lead you to a bishopric ere all is done, for that's your mind and aim, and if you would put off your doubts and moodiness, you've the brain to rule. That ship, the Great Yarmouth, which sailed for Spain some days ago, has been beat back into the river, and should weigh anchor again tomorrow morning. I have letters for the Spanish court, and you shall take them with my verbal explanations, which I will give you presently, for they would hang us, and may not be trusted to writing. She is bound for Seville, but you will follow the Emperor wherever he may be. You will go, won't you?" And he glanced at him sideways. "I obey orders," answered Martin, "though I know little of Spaniards or of Spanish." "In every town the Benedictines have a monastery, and in every monastery interpreters, and you shall be accredited to them all who are of that great brotherhood. Well, 'tis settled. Go make ready, as best you can. I must write. Stay, the sooner this Harfleet is underground the better. Bid that sturdy fellow, Bull, find the sexton of the church, and help dig his grave, for we will bury him at dawn. Now go, go, I tell you I must write. Come back in an hour, and I will give you money for your faring, also my secret messages." Brother Martin bowed, and went. "A dangerous man," muttered the abbot, as the door closed on him. "Too honest for our game, and too much an Englishman. That native spirit peeps beneath his cowl. A monk should have no country, and no kin. Well, he will learn a trick or two in Spain, and I'll make sure they keep him there a while. Now for my letters." And he sat down at the rude table, and began to write. Half an hour later the door opened, and Martin entered. "What is it now?" asked the abbot testily. "I said, come back in an hour." "Aye, you said that, but I have good news for you, that I thought you might like to hear." "Out with it then, man. It's scarce nowadays. Had they found those jewels? No, how could they? The place still flares." And he glanced through the window place. "What's the news?" "Better than jewels. Christopher Harfleet is not dead. While I was praying over him, he turned his head and muttered. I think he is only stunned. You are skilled in medicine. Come, look at him." A minute later, and the abbot knelt over the senseless form of Christopher, where it lay on the filthy floor of the neat house. By the light of the lanterns, with deft fingers, he felt his wounded head, from which the shattered casque had been removed, and afterwards his heart and pulse. "The skull is cut, but not broken," he said. "My judgment is that, though he may lie unsensed for days, if fed and tended this man will live, being so young and strong. But if left alone in this cold place, he will be dead by morning, and perhaps he is better dead." And he looked at Martin. "That will be murder indeed," answered the secretary. "Come, let us bear him to the fire, and pour milk down his throat. We may save him yet. Lift you his feet, and I will take his head." The abbot did so, not very willingly, as it seemed to Martin, but rather as one who has no choice. Half an hour later, when the hurts of Christopher had been dressed with ointment and bound up, and milk poured down his throat, which he swallowed although he was so senseless, the abbot, looking at him, said to Martin, "You gave orders for this Harfleet's burial, did you not?" The monk nodded. "Then have you told any that he needs no grave at present?" "No one except yourself." The abbot thought a while, rubbing his shaven chin. "I think the funeral should go forward," he said presently. "Look not so frightened. I do not purpose to inter him living. But there is a dead man lying in that shed, Andrew Woods, my servant, the Scotch soldier whom Harfleet slew. He has no friends here to claim him, and these two were of much the same height and breadth. Shrouded in a blanket, none would know one body from the other, and it will be thought that Andrew was buried with the rest. Let him be promoted in his death, and fill a knight's grave." "To what purpose would you play so unholy a trick, which must, moreover, be discovered in a day, seeing that Sir Christopher lives?" asked Martin, staring at him. "For a very good purpose, my friend. It is well that Sir Christopher Harfleet should seem to die, who, if he is known to be alive, has powerful kin in the south, who will bring much trouble on us." "Do you mean? If so, before God I will have no hand in it." "I said, seem to die. Where are your wits tonight?" answered the abbot with irritation. "Sir Christopher travels with you to Spain as our sick brother Louise, who, like myself, is of that country, and desires to return there, as we know, but is too ill to do so. You will nurse him, and on the ship he will die or recover, as God wills. If he recovers, our brotherhood will show him hospitality at Seville, notwithstanding his crimes, and by the time that he reaches England again, which may not be for a long while, men will have forgotten all this fray and a greater that draws on. nor will he be harmed, seeing that the lady whom he pretends to have married is dead beyond a doubt, as you can tell him should he find his understanding." "A strange game," muttered Martin. "Strange or no, it is my game which I must play, therefore question not, but be obedient, and silent also on your oath," replied the abbot in a cold, hard voice. "That covered litter which was brought here for the wounded is in the next chamber. Wrap this man in blankets and a monk's robe, and we will place him in it. Then let him be borne to Blossholme as one of the dead by brethren who will ask no questions, and ere dawn on to the ship Great Yarmouth, if he still lives. It lies near the quay, not half a mile from the abbey gate. Be swift now, and help me. I will overtake you with the letters, and see that you are furnished with all things needful from our store. Also, I must speak with the captain ere he weighs anchor. Waste no more time in talking, but obey, and be secret." "I obey, and I will be secret, as is my duty," answered Brother Martin, bowing his head humbly. "But what will be the end of all this business, God and his angels know alone. I say that I like it not." "A very dangerous man," muttered the abbot, as he watched Martin go. "He also must bide a while in Spain, a long while. I'll see to it." End of chapter 5.